If I could have gotten 51 votes in the Senate of the United States for an outright ban, picking up every one of them, Mr. and Mrs. America, turn them all in, I would have done it. I could not do that. The votes weren't here. Well, I'd like to welcome everybody to another podcast. In this case, I call them Almanacks, but it's a podcast format. And I'm going to keep with the tradition of opening the Almanack with some kind of quote, trying to see if any of you guys know who said that. And it's not just a matter of who said that, but it's also a matter of in what context was it said. Not always accurate to just grab a quote and just run with it. Really have to understand the context, not just who said it, but the context of when they said it and why, and what was being said before that, what was being said after that. So the context here, some of you guys probably know who said that. That is current California Senator Dianne Feinstein. And she said this back in 1995. It was actually part of a 60 Minutes interview where they were going over the recently passed Clinton crime bill, or the federal assault weapons ban, which in the United States was in place from 1994 to 2004. And that ban was set to only last for 10 years, with the idea that was one of the compromise features of it, that it had to have a sunset provision, is what they call that. So it's going to last for this finite amount of time, in that case 10 years. And then moving into 2003, as we're getting close to the sunset of it, then Congress is going to have to sit back down and reconvene on it and see if it's something we're going to want to continue, or if it's something we're just going to let it expire and not renew the ban. In that case, it was 10 years. It did not get renewed. But before all that happened, back in 1995, Dianne Feinstein, and she's on camera saying this is for those who care about the Second Amendment or are very pro-gun. That quote and that televised interview after the fact of already, like right on the heels of just getting the Clinton crime bill, the federal assault weapons ban that lasted for 10 years. Right on the heels of getting that, Senator Feinstein, she came out and said that to the interviewer. And Feinstein is kind of an important character here because she was involved in helping write and helping author the original Clinton crime bill, the federal assault weapons ban component to it. She was a critical piece of that. And then later in life, after Sandy Hook, the horrible shooting that happened in years ago, that they kind of got the band back together again to try to reauthor a new federal assault weapons ban. And the one that they had put together in the wake of Sandy Hook and the weeks and months after it, it was structured very similar to the 94 to 2004 assault weapons ban. But it had a little bit tougher features. Did not have a sunset provision. It kind of tried to keep up with time in terms of how many other manufacturers were now making ARs and AKs and things like that. So there's a couple lessons that we need to learn here. Probably the first and foremost, taking the context of this quote, who said it and when they said it and why. She already got the assault weapons ban that she helped author. She already got that to pass, which was pretty onerous, and still was a step in the right direction for them on the gun control side in a pretty sweeping way, at least for the next 10 years. But even then she wasn't happy and wanted to explain that really, as she said in her own words, that really what she was trying to do, if possible, Mr. and Mrs. America turned them all in, that she would have done it in her own words. But she tells the reporter, I couldn't do it. We didn't have the votes. We needed 51 out of 100. We needed, obviously, a majority vote to do a straight, outright ban. in this case, I guess, dictating to Americans they got to turn things in, or else, probably much like Australia did many years ago. So lesson number one is it shows you that it's this never-ending desire to, it's not just simply an assault weapons ban. It's literally the person who helped write it and get it passed coming out of the woodwork even after she got what she wanted and still not being happy and really exposing the true motive of what she really wanted, but she just couldn't get it. And then we see that behavior fortified. Point number two that matters here is coming back out of the woodwork after Sandy Hook to write the failed assault weapons ban part two, the post Sandy Hook ban that was making its way through, but thankfully never ended up becoming law, where she came out of the woodwork and authored a new one that got the band back together again. The provisions were tighter. Any shortcomings they thought they had from the first one, from that 10-year period, they were reinforcing those and cutting that off and making it tougher, making it more onerous. And thankfully, again, that one obviously did not pass. But there's a couple lessons we can learn in terms of, we know that there's kind of maybe some, I've met people that they would just want a little bit more enhanced restrictions or make it, in their own words, a little bit harder for people to buy something like an AR-15 as opposed to, grandpa's hunting shotgun or whatever. And there's people who legitimately that's how they feel. And that's really, at least for now, that's really all they want. They don't have some grand end game to try to just result in all guns being banned, confiscation, something like that. That's really not their end goal. They're just kind of sitting there like, I kind of want it to be harder for people to buy AR-15s and things like that. I'm not saying no guns for anyone at all, or, even making people who already have them, I'm favorable to a grandfathering provision, but I just want them to be harder to get. There are people who exist like that, pretty sizable amount, that don't want to go scorched earth. That's not what they intend. That's not what they really want. And then there are people who really do want that, the Feinsteins of the world, that they really do want some kind of reality if they can help make it happen, where all gun ownership would be banned, outside of maybe even 22 pistols for Olympic target shooting or things like that. They don't care. They'd want just a full outright ban, confiscation, you name it. That's what they want. But they don't really come forward and tell you that. Their strategy instead, and unfortunately has been relatively effective, at least over the decades previous to this recent decade, but the strategy instead is to slowly just kind of erase and edge away at the Second Amendment and our rights, because they don't want to come out and just be that's a bridge too far for even people in the middle and even some people on the left who just want to see what they view as, common sense or reasonable measures maybe we can take. But if those people come out of the woodwork and say, oh yeah, we want to do an outright ban, this is what we're after, that's not a very appealing message. The more successful strategy over the years is to slowly chip away here, tighten things up there, slowly kind of ban this or phase that out. And eventually, with a continued, continuity involved here, but a continued long game of slowly edging things away, as opposed to overnight just trying to ban everything. We actually saw this recently come up, or at least in the timeline of events relatively recently, when Beto from Texas, of all places, El Paso, a place that I've lived for a while, so I can understand it. But Beto, in one of the Democrat debates leading up to the primaries and everything, that's when he had, I did an almanac on that too, of like him standing up there saying, hell yeah, we want to take your AR-15s, your AKs, things like that. And there were people who agree with that sentiment, who were telling him like, hey, you need to kind of shut up. Like, don't expose the playbook. Don't be so obvious about it. Don't come out there. That's going to turn a lot of people away. even people who would agree with maybe a magazine capacity ban or something like that, people who would ordinarily be on our side if we continue to edge things away slowly over time, they're not going to be on our side if you're standing up there saying, hell yeah, I want to take your AR-15s, your AKs, things like that. So even for those who agree with what he said, they were still like, hey, you kind of need to shut up and don't really let people know what the real mission is, okay? You can't be that open and that honest and that blunt about what you want to do, because we want it too, but you got to keep that down. That's not how we win. How we win is going slow over time, taking piece by piece and dismantling it over time. So these are all things that matter. Now, the focus point of this almanac is going to be the proposed plans from President-elect Joe Biden and his Vice President Kamala Harris. On their website, they've had it up for a while. The campaign website is still up. But the Biden-Harris campaign website, and for those who want it referenced, it's joebiden.com. You click on what he calls gun safety on that link, or on the issues. You can go to see where he talks about the issues. But it's joebiden.com/gun safety / and this is where you discover the stated plan of Biden and Harris of, if elected, this is what I'm going to do. And in this case, at this point, being the president-elect, once I get into office, this is what I want to do in terms of gun control. So everybody can access that. You guys can read along if you want. If you guys are driving or just listening just to the audio, we're going to go over this part for part. I'm going to cut out a little bit of just the dramatic and just overwhelming amount of sap, and really just cut down to the meat and potatoes of what the plan entails. But before I do that, the first side note is any presidential candidate, or in this case president-elect or congressman or senator or anybody, can have a campaign website that's going to talk about the things they want to do about healthcare, about the environment, about fossil fuels, about overseas involvement in war or military use overseas, about guns, about anything. So you'll find that it's very common. Congressmen, senators, presidential candidates, people running for mayor or governor of a state. This is a very common routine thing that you can go on their campaign website like this, and you can see the things at least they're proposing to do, or the things they'd like to do. Now, of course, keeping in touch with reality, that's all nice and well for them of like, hey, this is, if you elect me, these are the things that I'm going to do, if they say it very confidently. Or they'll say, hey, if you elect me, these are the things I'm going to work on to try to get done. This is what I want to do. But from what they want to do versus what do we end up actually getting over time when it's actually tested and trying to make it through Congress and everything else, what is promised versus what we usually end up with are almost always two very different things. So let's keep that in mind, that these are some pretty extreme campaign goals or policy goals that the Biden-Harris website, that their administration is going to have, of what they want to do in terms of gun rights or them trying to do gun control. These are pretty drastic, pretty big things that they at least say they want to do. But again, let's just keep in mind, will these things come true? Are these going to be things that actually make it through the House and the Senate and get signed by an executive? At least that part, if it landed on Joe Biden's desk, he would definitely sign it if it was able to make it through. And then even if it does make it through, then you have a question of, are all of the states in the union going to actually enforce it? Or are they actually, going to play ball and actually try to enforce it? Or are they just going to say, no, we're not doing that? That kind of becomes a toss-up, that the federal government might be, well, hey, this got passed as a law. This is the new federal assault weapons ban. And if you guys choose to not enforce it, or you guys don't want to enforce it, then how does it sound losing $500 million worth of federal aid or whatever kind of incentive they can just kind of hang over their head? So even if it does get passed, there's the issue of what states are actually going to enforce it, which states are going to be like, no, we're not going to enforce it. We don't care if you remove certain amounts of federal funding. We don't care. We're not going to do it. But also, more importantly than that, will it survive Supreme Court scrutiny? Assuming it gets passed in the first place. And that's also assuming you live in a state that's actually going to care. Or maybe the state is kind of forced to having to pretend to care about it, but on the streets and on the ground, law enforcement officers of that state, they just don't enforce it. They don't care. It's not something they actually make arrests for. They don't even care. So there's a lot of holes in that boat in terms of what the Biden campaign here, or in this case, the incoming Biden administration, what they want to do with guns as opposed to what is actually going to result. And at this point, I have a feeling it's not going to be this is not going to happen the way they'd like it to. Let's just put it that way. But we can detail that at the end. So with all of that initial discussion out of the way, let's go ahead. I'm looking at their website here. I've looked at it before, but this one, we're just going to go part for part. Again, I'm going to cut out some of the more sappy and dramatic language here meant to invoke emotion. That's kind of the secret ingredient, what's needed here. And instead, I'm just going to focus on the meat and potatoes of what's going on. So it says, reading through, Joe Biden has taken on the NRA on the national stage and won twice. In 1993, he shepherded through Congress the Brady Handgun Violence Prevention Act, which that act established background checks, or the NICS checks, the 4473s and all that. And then they're claiming it kept more than 3 million firearms out of dangerous hands. So that's probably just the raw number of how many denials have been accumulated or racked up over time. And then he's saying in 1994, Biden, along with Senator Dianne Feinstein, a character that we just got introduced to, secured the passage of 10-year bans on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. As president, Joe Biden will defeat the NRA again. Okay, so a couple things we got to take out of that. First of all, he's bringing up his street cred for those who really want to see gun control or really want to see a federal assault weapons ban, or this is a big issue for them on that side of the house. Building up the street cred of like, hey, Joe Biden, he's a smooth operator. He's an experienced guy working against the NRA. He's gotten things done in the past, so believe in him because he can do it again. Next thing that's going to matter here is going back to Dianne Feinstein writing the original one, but then also dusting off the playbook and writing the proposed one after Sandy Hook, the proposed assault weapons ban. Learning some lessons from that ban and where, in their mind, there were shortcomings or they didn't whack enough moles, and they want to kind of tighten up the ship a little bit, make a better policy for them to be more effective for what they want it to do. So that's going to be something that's going to come up a little bit later as we go. But seeing that previous ban not getting everything they wanted, and if they're going to propose it again, they're going to tighten up some loose holes there, and they're going to try to make it even worse, essentially, than they did before. Continuing to move on, Joe Biden also knows how to make progress on reducing gun violence using executive action. Okay, you starting to get a little worried yet? Let's keep going. After the tragedy at Sandy Hook Elementary School in 2012, President Obama tasked Vice President Biden with developing both legislative proposals and executive actions to make our community safer. As a result of this effort, the Obama-Biden administration took more than 24 actions, including narrowing the so-called Gun Show Loophole, increasing the number of records in the background check system, and expanding funding for mental health services. Okay, so quick side note on that. The executive action thing, really what that is technically called by Article 2 of the Constitution, that's an executive order. What an executive order allows the executive or the president to do is reshuffle or change how things are done in terms of, really, that's what it's meant for, and that's what the authority covers, is within the executive branch itself. If the head of the executive branch wants to make things a little more efficient, maybe there's 10 commissioners at the FBI and they want to bring it down to 6 or something like that. That's really what executive orders were really intended to be, and at least at a bare bone minimum, the Constitution has that kind of lane that they have to stay in, that it only covers, like, hey, you can publish executive orders, but it's only covering things related to the executive branch. President Obama, when he came in, he popularized it by kind of redefining the term and calling it executive action. It sounds like I am just taking action because, well, in the words of then President Obama, if Congress doesn't want to do their job, then I'll do it for them, and I'm going to take action with my executive actions. Getting back to the post-Sandy Hook thing, President Obama did put then Vice President Biden in charge of a task force to come up with ideas, is essentially what that was supposed to be. There were over 24 executive orders that Obama then published, but again, I remember analyzing those back when they came out, and people were worried, like, oh, President Obama is just going to publish an executive order banning all AR-15s or something like that. Again, by Article 2 of the Constitution, even Obama knew, and there was no way that could happen in the form of an executive order. So really what it amounted to is kind of a finger wag at the ATF, like, hey, you guys need to be a little bit more efficient. These are things that we got to do. Also, we're going to verify that all federal and state agencies are at least trying to talk together. So if somebody commits a felony in this state and then they try to buy a gun in that state, that all the systems are talking and everything's going to make sense, so that person would be denied. What I find kind of laughable is in the own language of the website here, they say, including narrowing the so-called gun show loophole, which the phrase gun show loophole on the website is in quotes. And they call it the so-called, quote, air quotes, gun show loophole, end quote. So it's like saying the gun show loophole in a serious manner, at least on the pro-gun side of the house, is laughable at best, but I find it a little humorous that they call it the so-called and then air quote it gun show loophole. So it's almost like even they know it's bogus, but maybe that if I was on Joe Biden's writing staff, maybe that could have been handled a little differently, but it's just kind of laughable, at least for someone on my side of the gun issue. All right, let's keep moving on. It's within our grasp to end our gun violence epidemic and respect the Second Amendment, which is limited. Okay, so there's two important things that just got out of that. I'll say it again. It's within our grasp to end our gun violence epidemic and respect the Second Amendment, which is limited. First thing, number one, is that's kind of rich to call, a lawful individual natural inalienable right in the ownership of firearms, to call that an epidemic literally in the middle of a global pandemic. So that's kind of rich that you just come out and say that. And it's kind of that double-edged sword, quasi-truth, sort of trying to grasp at straws and bring people in and get on board with this, maybe people who own guns, by saying, and respect the Second Amendment, comma, which is limited. So that's saying that we're trying to bring people in and kind of, Trojan horse this thing and make it sound like we care about the Second Amendment. We're going to respect it, but we also identify, or at least we believe, that it's limited. Okay, so those are the two important things I got out of that. As president, Biden will pursue constitutional, common sense gun safety policies. Biden will, and it's going to list all that, but going back to that, Biden will pursue constitutional, common sense gun safety policies. So first of all, I'm part of the crowd where any infringement or restriction or either taking guns away or telling people you can't access this previously legal gun. And even things to me like the 1934 NFA need to go away. I view all of it as infringement and unconstitutional in my view. So Biden will pursue constitutional measures. We'll see about that because we're about to read them, but also keep in mind you have a Supreme Court that is not in your favor. Very pro-gun, or at least very friendly to gun issues in a pro-gun sense on the Supreme Court. 6-3 majority, at worst 5-4 majority, that some kind of federal assault weapons ban or any of the measures we're about to go over, even if they did pass, they're probably going to end up at the Supreme Court, just like Heller did, just like McDonald did, just like the California magazine capacity ban did, up at least in the federal courts. And I don't think that's going to play out. I don't think the federal judges, but also the Supreme Court, I don't think there's a very high chance at all that any of this stuff is going to be deemed constitutional if it comes under constitutional scrutiny at our highest courts in the land, or the highest court at SCOTUS. Common sense gun safety policies. So I don't like that. I've always hated the term common sense gun policies, or like, oh, let's do some common sense measures. The problems I have with that is, first of all, common sense is not so common. When we're talking about a hot button issue, a very tough issue that brings up a lot of debate, that is not, there's no universal thing. Like if I just walk down the street and I'm asking people off the street random questions, if I say something like, do you think murdering people is bad, or do you think, pedophilia or touching children or awful things like that, do you think that's bad? I'm pretty assured I'm going to get 100% common, united responses from everyone I would possibly meet on the street. They'd be like, yes, these things are awful. People who do it should be punished to the fullest extent of the law. But it's not like it's going to be 50-50. Those are issues where we are all unanimously, by and large, that's one of our values that are reflected in our laws in this country, that we are united in that sense. When we're talking about guns, though, there isn't a common answer. That if you ask me about what I think about civilians owning AR-15s, my answer is going to be very in favor of it, versus you might ask someone else and their answer is going to be, oh no, I think they should be banned. This is not a common across the board, we can all agree on this kind of thing. It's a very contestable issue. But to call it a common sense, oh, well, it's just common sense. Second thing I don't like about the common sense phrase here when applied to gun policies is it's kind of inferring like, hey, if you don't agree with these basic, simple, little humble requests that we're trying to get done, it's just common sense. And if you don't agree with these common sense measures, well, then you're a dummy. You're an idiot. You don't have common sense. You need to be on the winning team. You need to, something's wrong with you kind of connotation. So I've always hated the phrase, especially when used with gun control policies, like, oh, well, it's just common sense. It's really not. And I don't like the inference being made there of like, well, if you don't like the horrible things we're trying to do, well, then you're just an idiot. You don't have common sense. You should come on over here, the common sense island. I've always thought that was absolute trash. So getting back on target, we're going to look at some of these objectives. This is really where point for point it really starts to stack up in terms of seeing what they want to do when it comes to guns. So first thing on it, the bolded line, hold gun manufacturers accountable. In 2005, then Senator Biden voted against the Protection of Lawful Commerce in Arms Act, but gun manufacturers successfully lobbied Congress to secure its passage. This law protects these manufacturers from being held civilly liable for their products, a protection granted to no other industry. Biden will prioritize repealing this protection. End quote. Okay, a couple things to unpack. First of all, gun manufacturers are still held accountable for the products they make in terms of if they have a faulty trigger design, I don't know, maybe Remington, where they put out a faulty design that is wildly unsafe. They have some kind of gun that didn't pass proper quality control, so a customer using standard quality ammunition is just out there shooting it, and the gun blows up, and it's no fault of the shooter or the customer. It's no fault of the ammo manufacturer, and the gun blew up because that was a lemon that left the factory. Absolutely, that manufacturer is still on the hook for the gun. And again, faulty triggers. We've seen this now with Sig Sauer with their Cross rifle they just put out, instituting a pretty serious widespread recall of every Cross rifle on the market that anyone has bought. Remington eventually at long last did the same thing with the Remington 700 factory trigger. When a manufacturer, if that was a true statement that we see here on the website, that a gun manufacturer is not ever held liable, they've got more protections, and no other industry has this level of protection. If that was actually true, then we would not see any gun recalls. There'd be no reason to, hey, send the gun in, we'll upgrade it with the new trigger for free, send it back to you, you won't have to pay for anything. You're just going to be missing your gun for a couple weeks until we send it back to you. There's lawsuits on gun manufacturers who have done the faulty triggers or some kind of imperfection with the product that created a dangerous scenario where somebody got killed or injured or something bad happened because the product itself, either because the design was bad or because the quality control was bad. Yes, they get sued all the time. And sometimes it's not even their fault. Maybe the ammo was bad, but they're still involved in the lawsuit. So I don't know what this magic gun manufacturer protection is that no other industry has. Because that is a real thing. Gun manufacturers are held to account when it comes to faulty products or a lemon leaving the factory that puts people in risk or is dangerous to the shooter of the gun or anyone else around it. This one I don't like because it moves into the whole Sandy Hook thing or the DC sniper thing, we're going to sue Bushmaster, or we're going to sue the company Remington that made the gun that was used in some horrible thing. In that case, I believe the gun manufacturers should not be held accountable for that. I don't think a plaintiff in that kind of civil case should have any room to stand on of, hey, there was a mass shooter and I got shot, or, something bad happened and now I'm going to sue you because you simply made the gun, even though you had nothing to do with who the gun ended up going to or who took the gun and then did something awful on their own. It's kind of the same way with vehicle manufacturers. If they make a faulty airbag system, or they have to recall a certain make or model or year range of vehicle, or they have a faulty system where your tires are falling off if you're driving down the road, or the brakes stop working, or some horrible flaw, like a Ford Pinto kind of situation. There's a really dangerous flaw with the car and the design, and someone gets hurt or injured for that. Automotive manufacturers also are on the hook for that. If somebody drinks way too much, or drinks anything at all, is my policy, and then gets behind a wheel, drives while drunk or intoxicated or under the influence of something, they crash into a head-on collision of maybe a bunch of people packed into a car illegally just driving along their way, and they end up killing people as a result of them being drunk behind the wheel. I think that person should be held accountable for what they decided to do with that vehicle. We should not be in a position where we're suing Ford or Nissan or Toyota for DUIs. It's not their fault that their product was being used in a wrong and dangerous manner. That's solely at the feet of the individual who decided to make those decisions. But again, if the vehicle has faulty brake pads, faulty airbags, something is wrong with the vehicle that is dangerous to the driver or anyone in the car, then at that point, yes, the car manufacturer is on the hook for that, just like a gun manufacturer. But I don't think the gun manufacturer should be responsible for, someone like a DUI kind of example, or someone doing something horrible with one of their guns in a mass shooting. And I think that's where Biden would like things to go, is kind of what this really means, reading between the lines, and obviously cannot support that. Okay, here we go. Next point. Get weapons of war off our streets. The bans on assault weapons and high-capacity magazines that Biden, along with Senator Feinstein, secured in 1994 reduced the lethality of mass shootings. But in order to secure the passage of the bans, they had to agree to a 10-year sunset provision, and when the time came, the Bush administration failed to extend them. And then it's going to list in detail what he would want to do. I don't buy it even for 1/2 second. The 94 to 2004 ban that him and Feinstein secured, the Clinton crime bill, the federal assault weapons ban from that time, that did not, and the data shows it, did not reduce the lethality. It didn't change what happened in terms of North Hollywood shootout or the Columbine shooting. Didn't change any of that. So doing that, it did nothing, which someone on my side of the fence, being pro-gun, would take that data and say, okay, so there's no point in doing this. It's wrong to do this. It's also unconstitutional to do this. But all of that aside, and if we're just looking at what's effective, what's not, this is clearly not effective. Let's not do this. It makes no sense. That's it's just common sense, right? Well, people like them or people in favor of this, they're going to look at the same data or try to manipulate that data. And they're going to say, oh, well, look, we didn't get enough. You see, that was the problem. We didn't get everything we wanted. I mean, even in the explanation I just read, it says, oh, the Bush administration, they failed. They didn't extend it. We only had 10 years with it. And, we weren't given enough. Or like the opening quote to this Almanack from Feinstein herself, I didn't get everything I wanted, and I couldn't because the votes weren't there. But I really wanted all of them just to be gone. And I couldn't get it. And, it's always like a convenient fail-safe. It's a convenient cover story that they're going to pass something that has no effect on reducing anything. And then when that's when they're confronted with that in their face, then the fallback answer is, oh, well, it wasn't good enough because you didn't give us enough. We didn't get enough bans. We didn't get all the regulations we wanted. We didn't get everything we needed. And that's why it was ineffective. In this case, they're just trying to say it was, and we need to do it again, which is outright wrong on both fronts. So in detail, ban the manufacture and sale of assault weapons and high-capacity magazines. Federal law prevents hunters from hunting migratory game birds with more than 3 shells in their shotgun. That means our federal law does more to protect ducks than children. It's wrong. End quote. Okay, so I said I was going to try to cut out the emotional sap. I kind of fell into that trap on that one. There's probably more coming. But it's actually kind of useful because we're talking about the Second Amendment and all of a sudden hunting comes up. And they're talking about, if you have a shotgun, you can't have more than 3 shells in your shotgun while you're hunting waterfowl or game birds. There's also state restrictions too if you're deer hunting. Or coyote hunting in some states or whatever it is, that there is going to be a capacity ban in your gun or a limitation on how many rounds your hunting gun can have. Now, those are passed more for not protecting the ducks like Joe Biden is trying to sell. That's actually passed to protect other people. If someone's getting carried away chasing a deer and trying to slam 20 rounds at this thing when there's other hunters in the woods that may actually be in the background. That's why by law they limit how many rounds your hunting gun can have while you're in the act of hunting, because they don't want you to go out there and start slamming rounds or shells or bullets everywhere when there's other dudes in the woods that could be hit by that. Whether that's something that's right or wrong, I think it's more of a training issue, and that's more of a blanket solution, trying to limit people who are not well trained or don't know the fundamentals of gun safety, know your target and what's beyond. But they're trying to sell that as if it's like, oh, ducks have more protection than children. Oh my God, this is awful. That's taking some very small gems of actual truth and then kind of stirring that pot and producing a product that's not even remotely true. Joe Biden will enact, quoting again, Joe Biden will enact legislation to once again ban assault weapons. This time, the bans will be designed based on lessons learned from the 94 bans. For example, the ban on assault weapons will be designed to prevent manufacturers from circumventing the law by making minor changes that don't limit the weapon's lethality. While working to pass this legislation, Biden will also use his executive authority to ban the importation of assault weapons. Okay, so if we think back to Obama administration, who is solely responsible for there being an AK market. So if any of you guys have a completely U.S. produced AKM or AK pattern rifle, maybe you have a Riley Defense or a Century C39 or a Palmetto State AK. If you have any of these AKs, maybe got some Rifle Dynamics or Krebs, something really high end and expensive. But regardless, whether it's a PSA or some of the higher end ones, if you have a completely 100% manufactured AK in the United States and you have one, that is a true thanks Obama moment. Prior to his importation bans and the things that were going on with that, it was really cheap and easy to bring in a parts kit, rebuild it here using a number of U.S. components and then selling them. And that's why you may remember, 15 years ago, maybe not even that long ago, that you could go to one of the big box stores, you can go to your local gun shop and you'd see, some kind of decent quality AK using parts or being built from a parts kit. And it was going for maybe $250, $350, $400. In those days, back then, you could actually tap into a pretty quality AK for about $350 to $400. That was because there really was no U.S. AK market, because it was cheaper to bring in these parts kits, rebuild them, and sell them here than it was to actually start up U.S. production of AKs in-house and then offer it. It'd be like, oh man, if we had to make an AK in the United States exclusively, that would be 2 to 3 times more expensive than these parts kit guns that everyone's happy with anyways, so we're just not going to do it. And very few people outside of some basic, garage operations of guys, stamping out 80% AK frames and things like that. Outside of little tiny ventures like that, there really was no U.S. production of AKs. It was just really reworking or customizing existing AKs or reworking and building parts kit guns, because, if it's going to be 2 or 3 times more expensive to have a U.S. produced AK, no one's going to want to buy it, so we're not going to do it. In the case of the Obama administration, importation bans on parts kits and things like that, it basically boosted and created the U.S. produced AK market that we know today. So that's kind of a side note and a personal aside there on what that actually ends up doing. So another key part of that was, quoting again, this time the bans will be designed based on lessons learned from the 94 bans. So we're in a situation now, like I talked about, Dianne Feinstein coming back, trying to put together the post-Sandy Hook attempt, and how it was a tougher bill. Lessons were learned, and okay, we're going to add more into it. And that is one of the more concerning things, because everything they failed to do or everything they didn't get done in the previous ban that actually did happen from 94 to 2004, they're going to basically get Dianne Feinstein and a couple other characters together again and try to create something that's a little bit more ironclad, that allows a lot less wiggle room for manufacturers to simply offer the same product just minus cosmetic features, as an example. All right, moving on. This is probably the biggest one out of the whole thing that I saw when I read through this previously, and I've been looking at it. This is probably the biggest one. And this is also kind of potentially a pretty serious backfire factor. We're going to get into that. So quoting, regulate possession of existing assault weapons under the National Firearms Act. Currently, the NFA requires individuals possessing machine guns, silencers, and short-barreled rifles to undergo a background check and register those weapons with the ATF. Due to these requirements, such weapons are rarely used in crimes. As President Biden will pursue legislation to regulate possession of existing assault weapons under the NFA. Holy shit. So, oh wow. So let's unpack that. What exactly does that mean, or what exactly would that mean if that were actually to become law and actually become a thing? So currently they left out short-barreled shotguns, destructive devices, AOWs. They left out a couple other things, but currently if you want to buy a suppressor, or you want to manufacture or buy an already made SBR short-barreled rifle, if you want to make an SBS or a short-barreled shotgun, if you want to own a 40 millimeter grenade launcher like an M203, or if you have something that qualifies as the beautiful catch-all, the AOW, any other weapon, all of those things you got to pay for the tax stamp. Everything is a $200 tax stamp, minus the short-barreled shotgun. That's only a $5 tax stamp. And that there's kind of a specific reason for that, which we'll kind of drop that for a second. But you need to pay a tax stamp, whatever it's going to be. All of it pretty much is $200 unless you're doing an SBS. And then you got to wait for them to process the paperwork. And then you get the tax stamp, and then you can manufacture your SBR if you did a Form 1, or if you bought an existing silencer, and then the tax stamp comes back. Now you can take ownership of it. These things are registered in the NFA, the National Firearms Act registry. This goes back to 1934, still on the books today. And for those of you who are waiting on a suppressor or have previously put in and finally got suppressors, you know that the backlog of submitting a Form 4, submitting the paperwork to get the tax stamp, to purchase the suppressor, right now we've been noticing it's about 5 to 7 months of backlog. And they're not doing some super secret. It's not like getting a security clearance where they're interviewing people and checking your background and doing some Jason Bourne stuff. It's literally just sitting there at the ATF waiting to get seen. They're going to look at it, make sure it all checks out, run a standard background check, and if everything's good to go, they're going to issue the tax stamp and mail it back. After they've taken your money, of course, for the tax stamp. So at the end of the day, the backlog just on suppressors is about 5 to 7 months. 5 months if you're lucky, 7 months, maybe 8 months. That's what we're standing right now in December of 2020. So at the end of the day, if every American had to take their standard semi-automatic only AR-15 or AK or Ruger Mini 14 or SKS or whatever else they're going to put, and somehow they're going to try to define it. But if every American, we're talking millions of guns, if every American had to suddenly, all of a sudden, register it as an NFA item, there's problems with that. First of all, the backlog, you might be looking at years worth of backlog to try to even process all that, assuming you're getting all of those requests or all those tax stamp forms coming in of people who are even volunteering to do it. But let's say you had a high participation rate, you're going to be looking at years of a backlog of waiting to get a tax stamp simply just on an AR-15 or an AK that you own. Maybe that's going to include SKSs, Mini 14s, whatever. For all those guns, I'm assuming the same thing for an SBR would carry over, so you'd have to engrave your name or trust name and all that stuff on it. And then, of course, the cost. So now we're outpricing people out of their rights, where they went in and legally bought, maybe they have, 2 AR-15s, 1 AK, and maybe they got like 10 AR low receivers that are stripped. And as time and money allows, they're just going to build those out over time. So if someone wanted to play by the rules and now they're going to be NFA items, and now I have to put submit a form and pay a $200 tax stamp for each of these guns, which are now NFA items, we'd be looking at thousands of dollars worth of taxes on stuff you were already taxed on, using the money that you got paid for working your job that you already got taxed on to buy the gun that you paid taxes on when you got it out of the gun shop and purchased it legally with a background check and did everything that you were supposed to do. And now, in addition to that, after the fact, now we're looking at, oh, by the way, these are now NFA items, just as legally serious as suppressors and SBRs. So now you got to pay a $200 tax stamp to register all of these things. Yeah, that's the big one, and that might actually backfire in terms of you have millions of people with things that are most likely going to qualify. Obviously AR-15s, but they're probably going to try to draft up some kind of defining segment of what needs to be registered or what now is going to count as an NFA item. But you have millions of people with these things. AR-15s, AKs, probably SKSs, Mini 14s, maybe even something like an M1 carbine or an M1 Garand. Who knows what the parameters would dictate what is what if something like this were to get authored and start making its way through Congress. At the end of the day, what I'm getting at, you would have millions of people with qualifying guns that they now deem are NFA items. And at that point, you're dealing with a backlog of probably years trying to process all this stuff through and issue tax stamps for everyone who's going to do this. Second problem, probably the first thing that should have been talked about, is that's assuming people are going to comply. That's assuming people are willing to register an AR-15 semi-auto legal rifle and register that thing as an NFA item, that someone's even going to comply, that you're going to have a high amount of compliance, which, especially staring down the barrel of potentially thousands of dollars worth of tax stamps, I don't think you're going to get a very high compliance rate. Even if they were like, hey, we're going to waive the $200 tax stamp fee, but you still need to submit a form and apply and then register it as an NFA item with the ATF. Even if they waived the fees, which they probably wouldn't, because that would go against, they want to price you out of the common person being able to have these things, which was kind of the whole point of the Second Amendment. But even if they did an exemption on the tax stamps for everything you have, and assuming you're going to comply, I don't think people are going to comply. I don't think it's going to be, you might get 5% of the guns out there versus how many people are coming out to actually make them NFA items. You probably will not get a very high percentage of compliance or people volunteering or participating in that. Participation rate is going to be pretty low. And even if everyone did, and you've got a backlog of years of, people just rolling around with ARs, and if they're ever stopped or questioned, be like, yep, I submitted the form a year and a half ago. I'm just like everybody else, still waiting. So that kind of opens the door for those of us who will not comply, just rolling around, be like, yep, yeah, I've submitted it just like everybody else, and I'm waiting just like everyone else. So it becomes an unenforceable thing, and it's trying to keep up with just how fast could they process all of those applications versus what are people really going to do, which is I'm just going to own it. I'm just going to hang out. I'm just going to do whatever. From a military standpoint, what if you have someone who's deployed overseas and they have their guns locked up in a gun safe in a storage unit while they're deployed? They physically are not in the country and they're, fighting in a war, and their legally acquired, privately owned property is sitting locked up back stateside. This thing passes, they come home, and now they're in possession of something, and maybe there was a cutoff that you had to, submit a Form 1 or submit whatever form they're going to want and then register it as an NFA item. What if they get home from that deployment, the grace period or the cutoff date has ended, and now they're sitting there like, well, what am I supposed to do now? I was literally going out there fighting for freedom, fighting for our Constitution and our way of life, and now I come home and now I'm the felon? Like, what's up with that? Yeah, so I just see a lot of non-compliance. The other side of the equation on that, speaking of non-compliance, is you might have an individual sitting there with an AR-15 like, oh, well, now I guess they say it's supposed to be an NFA item and I'm supposed to register this thing and pay $200 and file a form, and now it's an NFA item. And if I don't do that, then it's carrying a felony and a pretty heavy-duty consequence on that. So at this point, you know what? Who cares? If they're going to make me a felon anyway, it's full auto time. I don't care anymore. So you might have, just based on basic tenets of human and especially American behavior, you might just have dudes sitting around be like, you know what? If they're going to if they made me a felon, and if I'm going to be a felon if caught with this thing, I might as well just whatever. I'm making it a machine gun now. I don't care. So this might backfire in a pretty bad way, assuming it even makes it. But that's probably one of the more serious tenets on this proposed stuff. We're going to keep moving. Let's see. Quoting again. Buy back the assault weapons and high-capacity magazines already in our communities. Biden will also institute a program to buy back weapons of war currently on our streets. This will give individuals who now possess assault weapons or high-capacity magazines two options: sell the weapons to the government or register them under the National Firearms Act. So again, back on that NFA stuff, and I said this in a previous Almanack when we talked about Beto with his "hell yeah, we're going to take your ARs" comment. I don't like the phrase "buy back." Oh, we're doing a gun buyback, or we're going to require people, to participate in a gun buyback. I don't like that because it was never theirs to begin with. It's not like I bought it from them and now they're buying it back. It's my property. I bought it. It was never yours. So there's nothing for you to buy back. And if you are interested in me selling it to you, well, it's not for sale. This is my property. I do not consent. I legally acquired this with a background check. I got the receipt. I got the invoice. I got everything. I fulfilled my obligation obtaining this firearm. I bought it legally. I paid my own money for it. By the way, I was already taxed on it. It's mine. It was never yours. So you're not buying back shit because it was never yours to begin with. And no, since you asked, I'm not interested in selling it because I do not consent. It's not what I'm interested in doing, so I'm not going to sell it. That's my mindset when it comes to this whole buy back phrasing. But you guys just heard it, quoting again, this will give individuals who now possess assault weapons or high-capacity magazines two options: sell the weapons to the government or register them under the NFA. So right from the horse's mouth on what they want to do, either we are supposed to sell them to the government or we have to register them as NFA items, which, by the way, going back to the NFA discussion, the 1934 NFA did not have, they have SBRs, SBSs, suppressors, machine guns, destructive devices, any other weapons. There's classifications for what it is, what it's called, and what needs to be registered as an NFA item. There is no category of assault weapon. So to do this would also require amending the 1934 NFA to, I guess, create a new classification of assault weapon. And just like they did in 1986 with machine guns, just like, hey, here's the grace period. We have this new thing called an assault weapon. And that's a new NFA item. You need to register it as that NFA item, get a tax stamp for it, and you have this long to do it, and then we're cutting it off. There's no more. So all of this is just hot trash. Obviously, this is onerous and just awful towards the Second Amendment. But also, at least the good news here, especially with the composition of the Supreme Court, especially with Heller versus D.C. and McDonald versus Chicago, I do not see this, assuming it even makes it into law, I do not see this standing constitutional scrutiny. I do not. But still, things we should care about, things I care about, things that are a little worrying, but at the same time, This is a pretty severe bridge to cross, and it might be a bridge way too far, at least as far as Article 3, the judicial branch. Marbury versus Madison, what is or is not constitutional. I see some issues here. All right, next point, quoting again, reduce stockpiling of weapons. In order to reduce the stockpiling of firearms, Biden supports legislation restricting the number of firearms an individual may purchase per month to 1, end quote. Okay, so let's take that and just copy and paste it onto the First Amendment. Like, hey, I support your right to, go to church and believe in whatever God you want, freedom of religion. But nobody really needs to be going to church more than once a month. Come on, let's get real. That you might be a psycho, you might be dangerous, you might be an extremist or a religious zealot. I still support your right of freedom of religion, but, nobody needs to be going to church more than once a month. So you can only go once a month. Or, whether maybe it's a journalist, freedom of expression, freedom of speech. Maybe it's a journalist like, I support your right to publish an article. Okay, but let's stop stockpiling articles on your blog or on the New York Times or whatever. You can only publish one article a month. Let's get real. Come on. Or again, First Amendment, back to freedom of religion, going back to the previous points of like, hey, if you have a Bible or a Quran or you have a Book of Mormon or, you have a Torah or you have some religious book or text, look, we're not saying that you can't own it. You just have to register it with the federal government. Got to have a serial number. You got to apply for a tax stamp to own it. It's got to be registered to you that you own this Bible or this Quran or whatever it is. Or if you don't want to do that and that's a little too expensive or that's not something you want to do, then you can just go ahead and sell it back to us where we'll just go ahead and burn it for you. So again, I don't think that's a crazy argument to make that if we're taking these proposed ideas of what to do about the Second Amendment, and we just copy and paste them and throw them on the First Amendment, the situation starts to look a little messy. Looks pretty concerning. It's starting to get a little scary when you start to do that. And I've had some people say, oh, well, that would never happen here. Are you kidding? Like, that's a tenet of American society is freedom of religion and freedom of speech. You're crazy. That's crazy to even try to make the comparison. And I'm like, my response is legally, it absolutely is not. Because if we're doing this on the Second Amendment, what makes you think we can't do it on the First Amendment or the Fourth Amendment or the Fifth Amendment or any of the other of the Bill of Rights? So legally, I would encourage my opponents to have a little bit more intellectual honesty and just be able to reduce that cognitive dissonance and be like, hey, just because you hate guns and you love the First Amendment does not mean that it's all good in the hood. It does not mean everything's great. If you literally take the stuff you want to do with the Second Amendment and you put that on the First Amendment, things start to sound a little 1930s Germany. Okay? And I'm blown away by people who, when they're confronted with that metaphor or just taking the same stuff and putting it on the First Amendment, they're like, oh, well, that's crazy. And I agree. Yes, it is crazy. Do you see what I'm saying? This is insane. But they don't see it quite the same way. So another thing too is one gun purchase per a month. So what if I'm a collector and I'm buying a matched set of revolvers, sequential serial numbers, and I'm buying both guns? Now I can only buy one of them, and then they got to hold the other gun, and then next month I can come back to the auction house or the gun shop and then buy the other one, or at least take the other one home now. I don't understand if you're a gun collector or if you already have 10, 20, 30, 40 guns. There's people who have collections that are much larger than that. If you already have this many guns and you want to buy, 2 or 3 AR-15 lower receivers, or in this case, you want to buy, maybe you're a Boy Scout camp coordinator, you need to buy 10 bolt action single shot 22 rifles for the shooting merit badge. So you're trying to go in there and just buy all 10 of these in one go and just take them to the Boy Scout camp next week or whatever, or part of the troop property or whatever it's going to be. You need to get that done over 10 months, and that's on top of whatever personal guns you're going to be buying for yourself or trying to buy in that span of time. What that means to me, again, another backfire thing, looking at how this would actually go down. This can be a lot of straw purchasing. Let's just get that right. And that's kind of backfiring the whole point of, the person who buys the gun should be the one filling out the form. And if that person already maxed out on his one gun a month, maybe he's going to get his wife or his mom or his brother-in-law to buy one. It's just, the whole thing is really gross. I do not want straw purchases. Hate it. It is illegal, but I'm also very against it as well. And I just see this encouraging straw purchasing. That's not something I can support. All right, keep moving here. Keep guns out of dangerous hands. The federal background check system, the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, what we call the NICS, is one of the best tools we have to prevent gun violence, but it's only effective when it's used. Biden will enact universal background check legislation and close other loopholes that allow people who should be prohibited from purchasing firearms from making those purchases. Literally, we just talked about a provision, that's the end quote, but literally we just talked about a provision that would encourage straw purchasing. So if someone bought one gun a month and they're not able to buy another one, they're now, at least for that month period, they're now prohibited from purchasing another one. They're a prohibited purchaser. He's going to grab Uncle Larry and have Uncle Larry go in and do it, and then hand him, as temporarily a prohibited purchaser, hand him the gun. So we just, it's breathtaking that we just went from something that would strenuously push and create straw purchasing on a grand scale, but now they turn around and they talk about, oh, well, that's bad and we need to stop it. Okay, so let's see what additional stuff that we're looking at here. Require background checks for all gun sales. Today, an estimated 1 in 5 firearms are sold or transferred without a background check. Biden will enact universal background check legislation requiring a background check for all gun sales with very limited exceptions, such as gifts between close family members. This will close the so-called, there it is again, the so-called quoted gun show and online sales loophole that the Obama-Biden administration narrowed, but which cannot be fully closed by executive action alone. Okay, first of all, what is this online sales loophole business? If you go, let's say, Palmetto State Armory, and you want to buy one of their AKs or one of their lowers, if you go online and you're on Gun Broker and you find, a vintage rifle or milsurp you want to buy, you can buy it, but it's going to your local gun shop. There's going to be, it's not going to your house. That ended with Lee Harvey Oswald, where he got the Carcano from a mail order catalog. That's when that ended, after the Kennedy assassination. Okay, so I don't know, unless they're referring to, hey, I'm going to go on, a gun forum or a website of gun owners and gun collectors, and I'm going to post up a gun that I want to sell, or I want to sell this gun. The person's not able to buy it just right off the website. It's not like you can throw it in a box and just mail it. Dude's going to show up. There are some requirements, at least having to check the ID, make sure that they're of the right age and they are who they say they are, and you have no reason to believe that they're a prohibited purchaser. But at the end of the day, it is legal to privately sell your firearm, at least on a federal level. Some states, California as an example, they do require that if you own a gun and you're kind of tired of it, or you were excited about it but you're not anymore, you want to sell it, California does require that the buyer and the seller, they can talk and meet online at a forum or some kind of website where the seller can advertise it, and they can kind of set up some details, pick a gun shop and a time and a place. But the buyer and the seller have to come in with the gun. They exchange cash or payment, Venmo, whatever it's going to be, by themselves, and the gun shop takes in the gun, does a background check on both the buyer and the seller. The buyer does the paperwork, and then in the state of California, they got to wait 10 days before they can pick it up, which is kind of, especially if you already have a ton of guns, that's a whole other thing about waiting periods, which we won't get into for the moment. California does require this, where you can't simply just sell a gun to someone, write up a bill of sale, check their ID, make sure everything's good to go, and have the bill of sale and you're set. California, for a fact, requires that for a private party transfer. But the way that they effectively get that done is through 100% universal gun registration. So, and this kind of goes back to everything having to be an NFA item. California does have a registry of who owns AR-15s. Even the California compliant, in the past it was the bullet button. Now it's like all the gun has to look like this crazy spaceship without the assault weapon alleged features on it. And it's not a registered assault weapon. There's legal ways to have a featureless AR-15 is what they call that in California. But at the end of the day, the state of California knows that you have that AR-15 just as long guns are registered, and they've been that way for years now. So if this were to happen, you need to now register that as part of the NFA. California knows that you have it. So you having an option of just like, you know what, I'm not going to comply and I'm just going to do me. They would, in that case, they would have a record showing that you own that gun. And then if this passes, or this got formulated into a law and then actually passed, then you would have a requirement to register it as an NFA item. But the state knows, because they have universal gun registration, period, on everything. That would put you kind of in a sticky situation, because if you're not going to register it, then you have to sell it. Or they might come to your house asking for it. All these things are kind of asking for trouble on multiple fronts in multiple ways, which is why I'm against all of that. But getting back to the background checks for all gun sales, depending on state legality, if you're in a free state, at least in terms of federal law, if you are tired of this gun or you want to sell it, you want to get some extra cash, whatever, you want to sell your property, there is no requirement to do a bill of sale. You just have to verify they are who they say they are. They're the correct age. If they're buying a handgun, they got to be at least 21 and a resident of that state. If they're buying a long gun, they got to be at least 18 years old. You got to have no reasonable suspicion to believe that they're going to be a prohibited purchaser or a felon. But there's no requirement to do a bill of sale, although I highly encourage writing up a bill of sale. But that is currently the law, and they're going to want to put an end to that, where you have your own property that you get to have when we say so, after you've paid the money and registered it with us. And if you ever want to sell it, we also are going to have a hand in that, in terms of, we need to know when you're doing that, and we need to probably have you pay some more money or taxes, or you got to pay somebody to initiate the private party transfer and get that done for you. So I just find the whole thing gross. If it's my privately owned, legally obtained property and I want to sell it, government shouldn't have to institute universal registration just to know, or at least claim that that's why they're doing it, that I'm doing the alleged right thing here. Most people who are buying guns or selling guns, usually going to be to a buddy, a family member, a trusted friend, someone they've known for years. It's not this huge epidemic like they mentioned in the beginning. I don't see it the same way. Talking about the gun show loophole. Okay, so again, a gun show, every vendor at the gun show, on the guns they have that are part of their business, chances are most of the time it's either a gun shop in the area who has an FFL and they rented out a booth, and now they're kind of extending their gun shop temporarily to this gun show since it's coming through town. Or you have FFL licensees who will go to multiple gun shows a year just to expand their consumer base as part of their legitimate FFL business. So when you buy a gun at a gun show and you're expecting to just buy it without a background check, you're going to be pretty disappointed. What does happen at a gun show is a lot of people who are interested in guns tend to show up. And when you have people who are interested in guns and they're having a convention, essentially, and they're all meeting up at the same time and place, you might have some guys like, hey, I've got an old 870 or something like that, trying to sell it. This one's for sale. So if you want to buy it, then we can talk. We'll write up a bill of sale, and same things apply. Gun shows, not a lot of people know, but they are heavily monitored from, having to pay with a credit card and get, an actual admission ticket. There's cameras everywhere. Local police and also ATF do a lot of undercover stuff at every single gun show you can imagine. So if you're a felon and you cannot handle guns, you can't own guns, you can't be around guns, the last thing you're going to want to do is go to a gun show with how much video photography of your face, the traceable movements that you were there. These are all things you don't want to be doing. So gun shows usually bring out the good old boys or people who are interested in guns, and all the guns being sold there from the vendors that's going on ATF Form 4473. There's a background check. It's a business that's temporarily operating at a gun show because they rented out a booth. And the same background check and paperwork you do there is the same stuff they have to do at their physical brick and mortar gun shop location. But you will find other people, surprise, who are interested in guns as well. And they may have something to sell or a gun they're trying to expand their market base, between their local family or neighbors. They're probably not going to be able to find someone interested in buying their very specific type or kind of gun. When they go to a gun show, they find other people who are interested in guns. It expands their base of people that could possibly be interested in it. So you'll see that as well. And I don't see why that needs to stop or why that's needs to be the end of the road or why, they always treat this like the big boogeyman. Especially when you're talking about the Sandy Hook shooter. And I'm not going to mention his name. Not a big fan of posting up names or faces and making them famous for others to want to emulate that infamy. But at the end of the day, Sandy Hook shooter stole or took his own mother's gun, killed her with it, stole her car, and then went to the school to go do that awful stuff. So whether we're trying to play whack-a-mole with gun show loopholes and that's the boogeyman, I think the real boogeyman is the guy who's not going to care and the guy who's literally going to kill his own mother and go do horrible stuff. So this is one of those moments I really wish we'd be looking at what the real problem is as opposed to let's stop chasing this boogeyman. That's not even the problem they think it is. Let's see. Close other loopholes in the federal background check system, in addition to closing the boyfriend loophole highlighted below. Okay, that's a term I haven't heard before, basically before or until I actually started reading through this. Let's see. Let me dig down where it says the boyfriend loophole. Okay, here it is. The Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act of 2019, which Leader McConnell refuses to bring to the floor for a vote, includes a number of reforms to keep firearms out of the hands of abusers. Senator McConnell should ensure this legislation gets passed long before President Biden would take the oath of office. But if McConnell refuses to act, Biden will enact a legislation to close the so-called, again with the so-called, in this case definitely so-called, boyfriend loophole and stalking loophole by prohibiting all individuals convicted of assault, battery, or stalking from purchasing or possessing firearms, regardless of their connection to the victim. This proposal is modeled after existing laws in California, Connecticut, Hawaii, Nevada, New York, and Pennsylvania. Biden also supports enacting the proposal to prohibit anyone under a temporary restraining order from purchasing or possessing a firearm before their hearing. Okay, so a couple things to unpack. If you are under any information in any court, you are a person of interest suspected of a violent crime, or you have a restraining order against you for stalking a girlfriend or boyfriend or close intimate partner, All right, you're not going to be able to buy a gun. You're going to go in there. There's going to be at least 2 questions on the 4473 that are asking you those exact things. And if you're a dirtbag and you're just trying to get it, you're going to check no on the boxes. We're going to run the background check. And surprise, you're relying on the form and it's right here. And you're denied, or at least go in the research to get denied. So I don't know how this would change things much. Definitely there was talk about Senator Mitch McConnell from Kentucky, Senate Majority Leader, of course, who they're referring to on this website. I guess inferring that Mitch McConnell and the Republicans hate women, or whatever inference is being made there, especially the way that bill is named. But the boyfriend loophole, it doesn't even make any sense, that phrase, in the context of like gun show loophole or stuff we've seen in the past. So I don't know how much that would change anything that's not already happening currently right now. Okay, next part, reinstate the Obama-Biden policy to keep guns out of the hands of certain people unable to manage their affairs for mental reasons, which President Trump reversed. I'm quoting. In 2016, the Obama administration finalized a rule to make sure the Social Security Administration sends to the background check system sends to the background check system records that it holds of individuals. I almost think there's some grammar issues there, but essentially Social Security Administration has to send those records and input them into the background check system of individuals who are prohibited from purchasing or possessing firearms because they have been adjudicated by the Social Security Administration as unable to manage their affairs for mental reasons. But one of the first actions Donald Trump took as president was to reverse this rule. President Biden will reenact it and enact President Biden will enact legislation to codify this policy. Okay, so in a most devious of, if you follow that rabbit hole, you are injured at work and you have unemployment and you're at the age where you're getting Social Security disability, or maybe it's not the age cutoff, that you did get injured at work, something happens and you have to get checked out with some doctor's visits and get rated by the Social Security Administration for whatever percentage of disability that they claim you have. Maybe it was a traumatic construction related accident at work and you claim to have PTSD from it, or are describing horrible dreams and things, or other things that the psychologist just kind of writes down, okay, this looks like signs of PTSD from this horrible thing, which is why they're disabled. That goes to the Social Security Administration. They're going to look at that and be like, oh, wow, he's mentally unstable, or that's one of the boxes, that's one of the red flags in our system. So automatically we're just going to say that he's just as crazy as the craziest as they come. He's going to now be sitting in that same category. We're going to put that as part of the background check system. And now that you're disabled and had that kind of encounter, you go in to try to buy a gun, and all of a sudden you get denied because, according to the Social Security Administration, you're just as crazy as the craziest people ever. And that reminds me, kind of leading into something that I also care a lot about, is the veteran community. Those of us or those who have been officially diagnosed with PTSD and are seeking help. They're living competent, fulfilled lives, gainful employment, everything's good, but it's like, yeah, dude, I did 3 deployments, and there's as a dismounted reconnaissance infantryman, like, yeah, there's going to be like some not Disneyland level memories and things that are still part of just how I live life now. And they said it would not be held against me or whatever. So, I openly, honestly talked to the VA therapists and, whatever, and everything was supposed to be cool. But because, I volunteered to serve and got sent to X, Y, or Z country to do whatever it was in a combat zone. And these are kind of like the physical or mental scars that kind of follow me with that. And now all of a sudden, because of that, because I raised the right hand, I stood up and did something, and based on my time in that, having clinically diagnosed PTSD, actively seeking successful treatment, everything's fine. But because it's on paper, now I'm going in to try to buy a gun, and they say that I'm, just as crazy as somebody trying to blow up a hospital or doing something awful. It's like, I have issues with this because it seems like there's no recourse to sue for redress. And this kind of reminds me of, like, at least in terms of the flight risk thing, that, they can put you on the list as like, hey, this is a suspicious name that gets the extra pat down when they go through airport security, or this, this is somebody we're just putting on the extra screening list for whatever reason, whether it's their fault or not. They don't even know they're on it, and then, they can't buy a gun. Like, if you can't fly, then you can't buy, I think is what they said. It's like, look, I don't want somebody who just committed murders and now they're booking a flight to Tijuana and they're trying to get out of the country, and on the way out they're trying to buy a firearm or something like that. I don't want people like that to have guns. I think we can all agree that's beyond sketchy. We don't want that. But at the same time, for whatever arbitrary standards, this guy forgot that his Leatherman multi-tool was in his pocket when he went through the metal detector, so now we're just automatically going to put him on this, like, secret extra caution list kind of thing, or whatever it is. And if he tries to buy a gun, then, he, without his knowledge, you don't even know, then you can't buy a gun. And now you're sitting there like, hey, this is a constitutional right. I've done everything I'm supposed to do. I'm not a criminal. Like, why did I get denied, and why can't I access my Bill of Rights? Like, what is going on? And not having a way to fight that. So, in the Social Security Administration example I provided of the guy who suffers a construction workplace accident, and he has, physical injuries, but also some mental or emotional trauma from that event. And he's doing all the right things. He's seeking the mental health care, help that he's going to need to recover and get back on the job. But part of that raises a flag in the system, or it's a disabled veteran or someone who's come back home, thankfully all limbs intact maybe, and has some kind of mental health care needs, just trying to get help and get better and successfully gainfully employed, and everything's going fine. But for some reason, it's because it's on paper, some kind of red flag was put in the system, and now all of a sudden them simply trying to buy, maybe it's a hunting shotgun so they can go out there on dove season and go out with their buddies, and they can't buy the gun. It's like taking away constitutional rights from people, and not without them even knowing, and for them to really have no way to sue for redress or to fight it unless they've got a lot of money for some lawyers to intimidate certain bureaucrats to get things to kind of happen. The whole thing to me is just gross. So again, there's certain things we don't want, but at the same time, I don't want to be in a situation where honest, good people are doing all the right things to help themselves physically, medically, and mentally and emotionally, and they're doing great and everything's fine, and they're just trying to access their Bill of Rights, and just suddenly they get denied, and they're like, what the hell, what's going on? That's not what I want. So that one also concerns me as well. All right, next point, close the, in quotes, hate crime loophole. Biden will enact legislation prohibiting an individual who has been convicted of a misdemeanor hate crime or received an enhanced sentence for a misdemeanor sentence of hate or bias in its commission from purchasing or possessing a firearm. So with that, we have to separate action from expression. So just talking about the expression or the freedom of speech, which later in our courts got expanded to freedom of expression, covered under First Amendment activity. I mean, you could be that neo-Nazi piece of trash on the street corner talking all kinds of horrible stuff that is offensive, that's disgusting, that's just horrible. But it's your right to say those things. That's one thing. Now, if you are that same neo-Nazi guy and it escalates into action that you physically harm or hurt someone that's, in your group of people as a racist that you're gunning for, and due to that, you committed a physical crime of violence in terms of a hate crime, maybe in a situation like that, some neo-Nazi beating up some Jewish guy on the street, maybe an Orthodox Jewish guy, whatever it is. And when you get booked for that, then they're going to attach, say, hey man, this definitely constitutes the parameters within the statute to assign this as a hate crime. That you did this not out of self-defense, not out of, just a standard scuffle in the parking lot with some random guy. You strategically did that because you hated this person for their race or ethnicity or whatever it is, any of the Title IX stuff. And you do your time, get out of prison, whatever it is, and then you attempt to buy a firearm. This provision is talking about the hate crime loophole of someone like that being flagged to not be able to buy a gun. This is probably the only thing that I'm going to have agreement with, or the only thing that does not bother me. I'm not one who wants any additional gun control, at all. But if something were to pass, and I would hate all of it, and then this aspect of it was in there, this would be the one and only thing I'd be like, hey, look, I'm not talking about words. I would have a problem if it's First Amendment stuff. If you were speaking your mind, you have the right to express yourself as long as you're not advocating violence and overstepping the limits of the First Amendment in terms of physically advocating for violence. You have the right to espouse your offensive views, your disgusting views, even racist views, all that. It's all First Amendment stuff, whether we like it or not, it is. And if that was going to flag you from buying a gun, that's when I would have some serious issues. But if you've already committed what is certifiably a hate crime against someone, and then you're turning around trying to buy a gun, I don't have a problem with someone like that being denied, or at least, I would want some kind of recourse, like anything, in terms of suing for redress, or in terms of having some way to represent yourself legally, like any American, for any crime or alleged crime or anything. But I just want to be very clear on that. The First Amendment component to that, of someone speaking their mind, even if it's views that we find offensive or disgusting or racist or legitimately horrible, and that would preclude them from owning a gun, that's where I have problems. If someone has physically demonstrated that they have attacked people or someone in terms of a legitimate clinical hate crime, as according to the statute, and then they're going to turn around and try to buy a gun, totally get that. So in the end, at least this is the one, and they always do it. They always try to include some kind of, some kind of olive branch in the middle, trying to get more people kind of involved. But I have to, again, for the last time, reiterate, I do not ever want to go down a road where someone's completely lawful First Amendment activity and freedom of speech or freedom of expression, and because of the things they say, or the Orwellian level thought crime of just they have the wrong opinions, so we need to not let them have guns, we need to not let them do this or that. I can never get on board with that. Whatever, no matter how disgusting, racist or vile or offensive those opinions are, they have a right to espouse those opinions. Again, as long as they're not actively advocating for violence, they're not stepping outside the First Amendment. And, someone who has even the most offensive or horrible views, just for thinking a certain way, that should not preclude them from accessing their Bill of Rights. But it's a whole different story if they've been accused of something, a hate crime, physical violence on someone, and that's gone to court and it's been argued and it's gone through a judge and a jury and they've been convicted of that. They've been to prison, served their time, and now they're turning around attempting to buy a firearm. That's where I can work with that, but not anything related to the First Amendment at all. I just want to be very clear on that, because if it was simply just based on not the convictions and 100% proven in the court of law guilty actions of violence that someone has done in terms of a hate crime and meeting that statute, but if we're only talking just the opinions someone has, and at some day if they ever wanted to exclude people just for their thoughts, well, now we're in thought crimeville is where we'd be living, and I would never be on board with that. This is probably the only thing that I can at least work with, but let's go ahead and keep going. Next point, close the Charleston loophole, in parentheses. The Charleston loophole allows people to complete a firearms purchase if their background check is not completed within 3 business days, which we're going to talk about in a second. Biden supports the proposal in the Enhanced Background Check Act of 2019, which extends the timeline from 3 to 10 business days. Biden will also direct the FBI to put on his desk within his first 100 days as president a report detailing the cases in which background checks are not completed within 10 business days and steps the federal government can take to reduce or eliminate this occurrence. Okay, so I don't know how it became, that was the end of the quote. So I don't know how it became, I guess, called or referred to the Charleston loophole. Not sure what that's about. Maybe some kind of backstory involved with the Charleston protests and white nationalists, people who showed up about 2 years ago, the Seville. We always called it Seville in Virginia, but Charleston, Virginia, probably pertaining to that. But getting back to what this is talking about. So by federal law, and mainly, and this is kind of old news, right out the gate, I'll tell you up front, this kind of sounds like grandstanding. It's not really effectual by and large for the most point. But by federal law, if you go into a gun shop or wherever you go, big box store, doesn't matter, and you want to buy this gun, you do all the paperwork, you submit to the background check, the company or gun shop or FFL, they're going to run your background check in the NICS system. And this kind of goes back to the Brady Bill, where back in the early 90s when the Brady Bill went through, and now there was going to be federal paperwork you had to do to buy a gun, and now there was going to be an actual background check on you to purchase a firearm. Back in those days, the system was kind of just getting spun up. And of course, we didn't have the internet or the technology and stuff that we have today. So you would put in to buy a gun, and the gun shop would physically have to call that in on a phone to a real human being on the other end, who would just kind of put that in the queue and put that on the docket. And that was like the Wild West days of having to wait several days, could be a little while before, depending on the efficiency of that state, because each state is going to have an office or some kind of department that's in charge of doing that. And back in those days, this could take a while, from the gun shop having to phone it in and read off your driver's license number, your name, birth date, identifying information, writing that down by hand on, whoever's on the other end of the phone doing the background check. And it might be several days before that state agency, whoever it falls on to do that, it could have been several days before the gun shop got a phone call back saying, hey, that background check you called in like 3 days ago, finally got around to it. It's good to go. Great. Where the gun shop would then call the customer, hey, just heard back. Everything's good. Come on in. You can pick it up. We're all good. So we're not talking about a cooling off period or a waiting period. We're talking about back in that day when this was all fresh and a brand new system kind of getting started and technology was not what it is now. There had to be an account for time to allow for these things to happen. From the gun shop to whatever state organization is doing the background check and then getting it done and then calling the gun shop back, there had to be time back in those days. So the law was set forth like, hey, someone is trying to exercise their Second Amendment rights. This is a Bill of Rights issue. Someone is they have the money, they're submitting to the paperwork, they're submitting to the background check, they're doing all the right stuff. They want to buy this gun, but it's a right. It's not a privilege. So, we need to account for the fact that some states are going to be really efficient and other states are really not. But someone should not be penalized and denied access to their rights after doing all the right stuff and submitting to all of that. Someone should not be penalized for that because their state happens to suck and not be as efficient with this new system we just put in and the background check and all this stuff. So if we can't get, essentially what this boils down to from a government standpoint, it's like if we cannot get our shit together within 3 days, this person can come back in and be like, hey, I paid all this money. I'm exercising a constitutional right. I submitted to all the paperwork and background check and everything that was asked of me. At this point, I just show me the gun, show me the money. I want my gun. At what point, could you leave me hanging out for 60 days? I paid the money. I did what you want me to do. I'm exercising a constitutional right. And it's not my fault that you guys suck. I want to utilize my Second Amendment. So that's where the law stands of, hey, after 3 days, if the state agency in charge of facilitating and running the background checks, if they cannot get their shit together, or they're so grossly inefficient that they can't get their shit together within 3 days, at this point, dude, I don't know what else you want to do, but this person is trying to exercise their rights. So that background check would still be waiting in a queue, still be waiting to get seen and processed. 3 days have elapsed. That person comes in saying, hey, I know the law and I know my rights and I've paid for this. I want my gun. I'm exercising my rights. And it's not my fault that I can't make this go faster. I pay my taxes. They should be using that money to make things happen better, but I don't want to be penalized for something I can't even control, especially when it comes to a constitutional right. So that's where the law comes from. They got the state. It's not the gun shop. It's not the FFL. It's the state, chiefly the department that runs the background checks. They have 3 days essentially to get their shit together. And if they don't, customer can come in and be like, hey, I want my gun. So this provision we just read is trying to extend that from 3 days to 10 business days. So not 10 calendar days, just Monday through Friday. I honestly, most modern states or states that are using modern systems, pretty much all the states in the union at this point, background check is going to come back. At least when we run a background check, it's going to take 5 minutes at maximum, maybe 7 or 8 minutes, worst case. A human being on the other end sees the entry that we submitted. They have to check it out and then, check the box yes or no. But at the end of the day, at least for us in the state that I live in, a background check, if they don't have a concealed carry, a background check on a standard driver's license, we're going to be sitting at 5 to 10 minutes maximum. When I left California in 2014, California also has a cool down period, or a 10-day wait, which is totally separate from what we're talking about. And California state law dictated that from the point of sale, all the paperwork's done, background check, or the DROS, dealer record of sale is what it was called there. Once that has been submitted, at that point to the second, we have 10 24-hour periods, so 10 calendar days, until this customer can come back and physically pick this gun up. And what I would notice, because you could log into the system and see, and the state was California was, the Department of Justice there, California DOJ, was so incompetent and so inefficient that we would not get a yes or no, approved or denied. We wouldn't get that answer until about day 7 or 8. So really what was effectually going on is they had the 10-day waiting period. Maybe that was an excuse for them to be lazy. Maybe they knew their level of incompetence and kind of took advantage of the 10-day cooling period. Whatever the case is, they were so behind the power curve and so incompetent that it would take like 7 or 8 days for us to finally see that this person was approved. And then they had another several days left to wait until 10 business days had gone through completely. So in the case of California, what I'm getting at least when I lived there, maybe it's better, maybe it's worse. I have no idea. The cool down 10-day waiting period for California, it was there to make people feel happy and stuff for those who wanted it or voted for it. But in effectuality, it was like, hey, we absolutely suck. It's the year 2014 and we have computers and stuff and we still suck. And it's going to take us 7 or 8 days to process the background check. So, that it's nice we have the 10-day mandatory waiting period anyway because we suck and we need all this time to make it happen. So this Charleston loophole point on their website here, I can see half of it, most of it, I think, especially states who have their shit together, that have balanced budgets, that everything is actually functional. A state like Utah, where I live, this is not, the 3 days is not needed. But for states like California, at least for the time I lived there, maybe it's worse, maybe it's better, I don't know. They relied upon it as a crutch to really kind of get their shit together. So maybe there's other states that have horribly in debt, unbalanced budgets, absolute bureaucracy, totally ineffective and inefficient and complacent like California DOJ was. But maybe there's certain states that need 10 business days as opposed to the federal currently mandated 3 days. But at the end of the day, I think this is largely using modern technology, not in a socialist state like California where we actually have free enterprise. Things are running the way they should be. It's effective, it's current, it's modern. But maybe this is just going to pertain to that. Otherwise, I kind of see this point as largely grandstanding or just kind of sounding really good, but not really changing anything at all. Okay, let's keep moving. Close the, quote, fugitive from justice, end quote, loophole created by the Trump administration. Well, of course, you can't have a campaign website without establishing an enemy. Going back to the quote, because of actions by the Trump administration, records of almost 500,000 fugitives from justice who are prohibited from purchasing firearms were deleted from the background check system. The Biden administration will restore these records and enact legislation to make clear that people facing arrest warrants are prohibited from purchasing or possessing firearms. Okay, so I don't have the backstory on the Trump administration deleting the records of almost 500,000 fugitives from justice. I know President Trump did do commuting sentences of nonviolent drug offenders who were caught in possession of 2 grams of marijuana or something. So, maybe there was an active warrant for their arrest. They didn't know it, whatever. Maybe there was something to do. I'm not sure what the details are, but at the end of the day, a fugitive from justice, it's not like Harrison Ford, The Fugitive, where there's some really high crimes and there's a wildly, surprisingly competent set of detectives on the case trying to track this dude down. Fugitive from justice legally would constitute even someone with a bench warrant. That's like you have an unpaid speeding ticket, you forgot to pay it, a month has gone by, and now they're like, hey, well, we didn't get a response, we didn't get payment, we're not sure what's going on, but now we're going to issue a bench warrant. So if you ever pull this guy over again or run the driver's license, you need to take him in because he has to answer for this. Generally speaking, people who have warrants out for their arrest are not people who show up into a gun shop, generally speaking, because they probably already know that they can't be in possession of guns. Probably not a good idea. If their parole officer ever found out that they charged a credit card at a gun shop, and that could obviously be traced back to them, that's probably not going to be a good thing. Probably not going to support their cause. People who are just driving around and don't just live in life and they do not even understand they have warrants out for their arrest are almost kind of in the same camp for me as people who are 30 years old, normal functional adult, and they just never got around to getting a driver's license or even a state ID card or something. It's like, okay, if you did some bad stuff, that's going to flag your state system, which is tied into the NICS check system, which means if you're trying to buy a gun, and that is literally one of the questions on the 4473, are you a fugitive from justice? Like, that is straight up one of the questions. Now, again, anybody can answer or lie on it, and they can answer any way they want to, but when we run that through, it's moving through the state system, any federal stuff or any courts of information, anything that's plugged into the system, which is everything anywhere, that it by law has to input that into the system. And if someone has warrants out for their arrest, that's going to go into research. About a week later, we're going to find out they got denied. And at least where I live, anyone who gets denied for a firearms purchase, they are going to have a visit from law enforcement. That's going to come up on their radar like, hey, there's a person who tried to purchase a gun. They got denied. This is the reason they got denied. These are the warrants they have. This is whatever prior felon tried to buy a gun. These are the warrants they have, whatever it is. Here's the address. We need you to go in, check it out. And depending on if they're a felon or what it is, book them, arrest them, take them down, or at least ask questions, make a little home call, see what's going on. So at the end of the day, I think that would need more information exactly what is being swayed here as to like how are we going to argue that 500,000 fugitives from justice suddenly just disappeared. Like, the argument is not even about guns, and it's more about bashing Trump for allegedly enabling criminals. So that one I come unprepared to the table with, but it's a campaign website, so take that for a grain of salt. Okay, moving on to more serious things. End the online sale of firearms and ammunitions. Biden will enact legislation to prohibit all online sales of firearms, ammunition kits, and gun parts. Okay, so for those of you who look at Palmetto State Armory every day, AmmoSeek.com, just all these places where you look for guns, AR build kits, ammo, magazines, whatever, this one would end, I guess, or they want to end the online sales of firearms and ammunition. So this probably would be everything from Palmetto State Armory, being able to sell online, to gunbroker.com, to all the usual suspects. That one I think is going to be a little tough because every single industry, like whether it's car manufacturing, even tobacco and alcohol, to, a company selling air fresheners, like you are not a business without a website, and you're not going to be a viable business unless you're doing business online. don't understand what the deal is with that. That's one thing that's just about as egregious to me as, the NFA registry for ARs and AKs, perfectly legal semi-auto ARs and AKs and things like that. That already is probably, that takes the cake for all of this, but ending the online sale of firearms and ammunition, or parts or kits or magazines and things, that's insane. As a gunsmith, when I have an old Browning A5 or, a Colt hammerless pocket gun, some kind of gun that's obviously out of production, and I need to find parts to repair these guns and put them back in the field so Grandpa Jenkins can take his old school A5 and go hunting again, and I need a new firing pin. That's what happened a couple weeks ago. Perfect example. I need to go to Numrich Gun Parts Corporation or any of these other places, Sarco, any of these places, or even Gunbroker, sometimes eBay if I have to. Like, I will dig and try to locate these old gun parts online. And it's like, am I really that evil of a person for trying to order an old Browning A5 firing pin from Numrich because it's the only place that has them? Like, am I really the enemy here? So this one, it's probably inspired from the Aurora, Colorado movie theater shooting, where I believe the shooter, again, not going to mention names, but I believe he bought like a whole bunch of ammunition online. So, of course, anytime someone does something bad, they use that as, setting the standard for, and just kind of cast dispersions on all of us, that we're all in the same group, that if you're ordering 40 rounds of .303 British from, Sportsman's Guide or something online, that you are instantly a mass shooter. Like, you're just as bad. Like, we just can't let you do that. It's too dangerous. You're a child. We don't trust you. We need to stop this. And I obviously disagree with all of that. That's second to the NFA situation. That's probably the second most egregious thing I've seen so far. So continuing the move here, next thing, create an effective program to ensure individuals who become prohibited from possessing firearms relinquish their weapons. I'm not even going to have to read the rest of it, just to tell you that's a total pipe dream. Look, if someone legally buys a firearm, so this is what this is pertaining to. If someone legally buys a firearm, and maybe a year or two later, they do something crazy, they commit a felony, they do domestic violence, they're convicted of that, they take a wrong path and do something violent or awful that would, exclude them from having access to their Second Amendment rights because they've demonstrated they are violent, they are dangerous, they're a felon, whatever it is. Now you're in a position where you have a convicted felon who bought those guns legally at one time before that happened, before they did that, and now they're still in possession of those guns. First of all, if someone is committing a violent felony or domestic violence or something like that, first thing that's going to happen when the guy gets arrested, gets sent to jail, moving into prison, everything else, like any guns in the house are going to be gone. The police are going to ask for that. They're going to take them if they find them. Like, hey, this guy just murdered someone and committed 2 felonies, and, are there any guns in the home? Not going to say that's perfect. Maybe that person gets out of prison. They are legally a prohibited purchaser. They did something awful. They're convicted of that crime, beyond any shadow of a doubt. They spent their time, and now they're back out of prison, and they legally bought firearms. Maybe they were hidden. Maybe they still have access to them. The bottom line is there's law enforcement is going to do the due diligence at, the point of arrest and making those things happen for people like that. But at the end of the day, you're never going to prevent somebody from acquiring a firearm or making their own, or like a felon who can't own a modern smokeless powder centerfire gun, yet they can go into anywhere and just buy a black powder firearm, or just buy a knife, or forget the guns or knives, pressure cooker or any of this awful stuff. So it's like, it's one of those feel good things that makes you, it's trying to advertise this, this emotion, or advertise this, paint this picture that, hey, we're doing such great things. But this is one of those things when it actually gets the boots on the ground and where the rubber meets the road, this is just pointless. Like, it's not a possibility, especially when you talk about what law enforcement already does when someone's arrested for a felony or arrested for a violent, misdemeanor of domestic violence or a crime of something that would keep them away from owning guns legally. So this one, I think it's just kind of another feel-good thing, but ultimately, you're not going to stop awful people with horrible intentions from having guns. And if you don't believe me, then look at prohibition, look at the war on drugs, look at the fact that meth is completely illegal, yet how much of that shit is everywhere, and people are making it. Depending on where you live in the country, like, it's not stopping anything. So again, one of those feel-good measures that I just think is very hollow. Let's see. Next one, incentivize state extreme risk laws. Extreme risk laws, also called red flag laws, enable family members or law enforcement officials to temporarily remove an individual's access to firearms when that individual is in crisis and poses a danger to themselves or others. Biden will incentivize the adoption of these laws by giving states funds to implement them, and he'll direct the U.S. Department of Justice to issue best practices and offer technical assistance to states interested in enacting an extreme risk law. So this one probably could be its own almanac, especially with regard to going back to the Social Security disability or disabled veterans, anyone with PTSD or mental conditions, what level of mental or emotional trauma has happened, what clinically is that level at, and of those levels, what would constitute being a red flag to fall victim to this kind of thing. The classic example of, the crazy hothead ex-husband guy who's stalking and has guns, and the ex-wife is afraid for her life. Everyone likes to talk about that, but this really gets pretty gray. And I don't like the idea of like, hey, we're from the government and we're here to help you. So for starters, we're going to take all the guns you have because we want to help you. And someone told us you were scary. Whether that's true or not, we don't know, but someone said you were, so we're here to help you. And we're going to help you by taking all your guns away until we decide that maybe you're not a problem anymore. But right now, we at least suspect you're a problem. Your neighbor, said you were scary. That's enough for us to come to your house and make things happen. So we'll let you know when you're sane or trusted again. That's a very malicious end of the spectrum to really antiquate that or push that, but I'm not with that. And again, this could be a separate almanac, so I'm not going to dwell too much on it. This one, if this ever becomes a bill that's trying to make it through Congress, this is one of the chapters. Well, I'm going to read the whole thing, but this is really where I'm going to pay very close attention to exactly what this thing is saying. So I think I'm just going to leave it there and just keep moving. Let's see the next one. Give states incentives to set up gun licensing programs. Okay, I can already tell you instantly, totally hate it. Biden will enact legislation to give states and local governments grants to require individuals to obtain a license prior to purchasing a gun. So again, this is the copy and paste argument that all of my opponents don't really want to confront, but I feel like deep down they start to kind of think about it once we've stopped talking. And that is, if we took that, copied it, and pasted it, and just put it on the First Amendment, how would that look like? Hey, we're not saying that you can't have a Facebook account or a YouTube account or a social media account. We're not saying that you can't speak your mind and utilize that great American freedom of speech. We respect First Amendment rights. We're just saying, before you're able to get a Facebook account or a YouTube or social media or a Twitter account, you need to get a license with the government, where we tell you finally and get you a little license card you keep in your wallet and you feel all nice about it. But we want you to get that license from us first before we'll allow you to speak your mind and express yourself. Or it's like, hey, like, we're not saying you can't go to church. We're not saying you can't be religious or that you can't own a religious text or practice and be religious in some kind of faith. We're just saying that if you want to practice whatever religion you want, we're just going to need you to get a license from the government as a religious practicer license. And, once everything checks out by our standards, you're going to get this really nice card in the mail. Just keep it in your wallet on you at all times. And then you can go to church, provided you only go to church once a month and your Bible is registered with the serial number with the federal government to your name and address. We're not saying you can't do it. We're just saying you got to go through these flaming hoops that might be a little bit expensive and exclusionary, especially for minorities, but we don't care about them either. That's essentially the message that I'm getting from this. And in fact, the whole gun control standpoint, at least as we know it today, has a pretty racist origin story of, guns were totally cool and everything was fine until black people wanted to buy guns. And surprise, we're moving past into Jim Crow, moving into the civil rights movement. Well, suddenly now that's a problem. Now we got to kind of start moving on this thing we like to call gun control, because you see, we don't want the wrong people to have these kinds of guns. And in fact, I saw that kind of language a couple paragraphs up that we previously discussed. Just making sure only the right kind of people have guns. Same old story. In this case, a different scenario. And for those who are really interested, if you really want to understand the origins of American gun control as we know them today and where that really stems from, it's kind of a racist little road trip if you want to go down memory lane. Not a really resoundingly awesome moment in American history, but it is true. And this is not the kind of stuff you're going to see on this kind of website or pushed by these kinds of people trying to promulgate these ideas. I'm just saying, knowing our country's history and when the gun control really started and why, gotta say, not a fan. Not a fan of requiring people to have licenses to buy a gun. Not a fan of any of that at all. I would like to say, and the way I believe, is my license to buy a gun is my Bill of Rights, my Second Amendment specifically. That's the only license I need. I don't need a special cool guy license where I got to pay money and jump through these flaming hoops just to buy a gun. Because I don't want to do that if I just want to go to church or if I just want to express myself online or publish an article or a blog or something. I don't want to get a license from you because I don't need to get a license from you. It's not your business. Back the fuck off, is how I really feel about it. Okay, so moving on to the... I guess you guys could probably tell I'm not a fan of like all of this, but especially that point. But moving on. Adequately fund the background check system. President Obama and Vice President Biden expanded incentives for states to submit records of prohibited persons into the background checks system. As president, Biden will continue to prioritize that funding and ensure that the FBI is adequately funded to accurately and efficiently handle the NICS system. Three things, starting with two things that stick out to me. So first of all, we keep hearing this word incentives. Like, hey, we're the big daddy federal government. We got all this money and it's up for sale. States can tap into it, but they kind of got to do what we want them to do in order to qualify to get all this big daddy federal money. So they keep saying, we're going to make incentives. The way that I kind of translate that, at least historically, how that's been used in recent decades, especially when you go back to, making alcohol, it has to be 21 or over, where other states had 18 was what you needed to buy alcohol. It was not, hey, we're going to provide an incentive, for the states to try to raise their legal limit to 21. It was more like racketeering. It was more like, hey, If you don't want your state to basically resemble a third world country and miss out on all of this money that all the other states who, kissed the ring and they bought into our situation, we gave them money. If you don't want to, be up to the modern standard and get all the good graces of the crown here and get all this money, then you're not going to get the incentive. But if you kiss the ring and do what we want you to do, well, you're going to get all this money. Kind of sounds like racketeering. You might as well just go around to every state and just beat the hell out of people until they give you money. That's pretty much what I look at when I see, we're going to incentivize the states. And no, it doesn't actually look like that in effectuality when it's actually carried out. If history is any guide, and I personally think it is, Biden will continue to prioritize that funding and ensure that the FBI is adequately funded. So how much of that is going into millions of rounds of ammunition? How much of that is going into other things? How much of that is going into all kinds of fun stuff? But they're adequately funded. So when I see adequately funded, here's the thing we're muscling the states to do, and then we're going to give a bunch of money to the federal bureaucracies and agencies so they can do what we want them to do. The way I see that is just expanded government control, but actually even more than that, just expanded bureaucracy, just a bunch of bullshit, just a lot of it, just more of it, more taxpayer money. And by the way, if we need more taxpayer money, what does that mean? More taxes. So I guess we'll see. That's a very rosy way to try to sell that, but I don't, at least if history is any guide here, I see that as racketeering, muscling the states, and expanding bureaucracy. One thing of note is there was a shooting. It was a ex-airman. It was a dude who was in the Air Force. He got kicked out of the Air Force. He had a gun, even though he was like a convicted felon and all this bad stuff. He should not have had one. And he was able to get that gun because he passed the background check, because the Air Force itself, and this happened, I think, 4 or 5 years ago, the Air Force itself did not put the UCMJ convictions and entries of his record into the National Instant Criminal Background Check System, the NICS. So then he turned around, bought a gun to kill his ex-girlfriend with, which he did, unfortunately, and had the government, I don't know, done its fucking job, this person would have been denied at the gun counter immediately, instantly. But instead, they kind of lapsed on that. So for those who are in favor of gun control, or you're not really buying into my viewpoint, when you hear people on the right side of life, pro-gun people saying, it's not that we need more, we just need to make our current systems better, there is going to be some truth to that. I don't know if we need to do it at the expense of muscling and racketeering the states and expanding the bureaucracy, which is going to continue to just be bullshit and a waste of money. I would really like to cut the fat, financially speaking, be very fiscal about this, but also very effective, primarily about what we're trying to do here, as opposed to we'll just throw money at the problem and see if it makes things better. I'm not sure that's going to work out. Next thing, we got addressing the deadly combination of guns and domestic violence. All quotes, here we go. The statistics tell a devastating and overwhelming story. The likelihood that a woman in a domestic violence... Okay, this is really, really hard to read because we got some serious sap poured on top of this. We are playing to emotions on a factor of not even 10, like we've cranked it up to 12 at this point. Let me see if I can cut the fat. If you guys are on the website looking along here, it's in the boxed in portion towards the bottom. Let's see. Biden recognizes that gun violence and domestic violence epidemics, again, that's pretty rich to say that in the middle of a global pandemic. Epidemics are linked and cannot be solved in isolation. Addressing the interconnectedness of these challenges will be a core focus of Biden's anti-violence work as president. That just sounds like a bunch of corporate shit. If any of you guys have been at some kind of staff meeting where you've got commanders and, O4s or majors. You got some command sergeant majors, maybe some first sergeants in there, and you're just that rando NCO that's, junior buck sergeant, whatever, E6 in the back. Maybe you're like a battle NCO or whatever it is, and you're just kind of hanging out in the back, and there's projectors and coffee and all these really smart people terms being thrown around. It sounds really cool. It sounds like things are going to get done. It sounds awesome. Maybe in the corporate world, all these CEOs and CFOs and all these corporate hacks and people just kind of hanging out around a table, and everyone's offering these really like cool, innovative words and ideas that sound really cool. But once the meeting is over and everyone packs up the laptop and projector, absolutely just fuck all gets done. This is exactly what this sounds like. Despite that, I'm going to keep reading here. It says, the Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act of 2019, which Leader McConnell refuses to bring to the floor for a vote, includes a number of reforms to keep firearms out of the hands of abusers. So first of all, just taking a pause. For those who don't know, for those who have never bought a gun, for those who don't know the legal statute as to what disqualifies you from possessing or owning a firearm or even buying one, one of those many disqualifiers is having a conviction of domestic violence. If you are convicted of domestic violence, like, you're not going to pass the background check. It's not something that's going to happen. You're already a prohibited purchaser. So like, it's not like, the Republicans and Mitch McConnell and the NRA are just handing out guns to violent physical domestic abusers like candy. The way they're trying to make this sound, that's not the case. And I'd be interested in really reading that statute. Again, if this actually comes before Congress, I would be very interested in reading specifically this part as to what is it going to do that's not clearly already part of the actual law. Let's see. In addition to all of this, President Biden will establish a new task force on online harassment. Oh, fuck. Here we go. Establish a new task force on online harassment and abuse to focus on the connection between mass shootings, online harassment, extremism, and violence against women. Again, these are all just feel-good things. A task force means like a 20-person panel where everyone has bright ideas and nothing actually gets done. Connecting the dots between, bullies on Twitter and people being all shitty to other people online, to mass shootings and trying to tie everything together. If there's any common trait I think we've seen for those who perpetrate just absolute evil, whether it's the Boston bombers, Timothy McVeigh with Oklahoma City bombing, I think his name is worth at least reference in there because that happened a little while back. Not everyone may know that. But whether it's Oklahoma City or the Boston Marathon or Sandy Hook or any number of these mass attacks in public, whether there was a gun involved or not, I think all of them tended to keep to themselves. All of them tended to be loners. All of them tended to go under the radar for the most part. But then it varies too, because it blows my mind that people are like, oh, well, we always thought if anyone was going to shoot up the school, it would be that guy. And then it turns out, a year later, that's what he actually did. It's like, well, then why the fuck are we not saying something, doing something? Why the police showing up to this house 17 times? You got like a whole stockpile hanging out. And, either we're not asking the right questions, we're not taking care of ourselves. I'm not sure what the solution is, but it's definitely not this. All right, let's keep moving. Expand the use of evidence-based lethality assessments by law enforcement in cases of domestic violence. I'm going to read this paragraph here. Lethality assessments, sometimes called risk or danger assessments, are a proven strategy that help law enforcement officers identify domestic violence survivors who are at high risk of being killed by their abusers. These survivors are then connected with social service programs that can offer services and safety planning. An evaluation of the lethality assessment program created by the Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence showed promising results. Did it though? I don't. There's no data cited. I'm not sure. Increased federal funding will incentivize jurisdictions. Again, there's that word, incentivize, aka racketeer and muscle, jurisdictions to take advantage of implementing these programs more widely. That one, I don't have an established opinion on because we have a lot of stuff. The Maryland Network Against Domestic Violence, I'm not familiar with that program. If they did, in fact, put some kind of program in place with local law enforcement and there were some results that showed up after an extenuated period of time, I don't know what that data looks like. They claim it showed promising results. What does that mean? I don't know what level of criteria they used to determine it was promising or that the results were in fact indicative of their efforts as opposed to the common trends of what we've seen over the last 20 years in that locale. So there's my demand to understand these claims goes beyond just reading the claims. I need to see data to like what makes you say that, and can you say that with actual confidence or actual, especially data backing it up. So I don't know. This one I would have to deep dive into, and again, that's another one where if this actually came before the House and then eventually the Senate and was actually trying to make it somewhere, I would intensely read the statute as to what the bill actually has in there, what the language of that bill would say. Okay, let's keep moving. That was boxed in. That was kind of domestic violence, women, violence against women stuff. That was kind of its own subsection. So now we're going to move back into the normal text, and we're actually almost done. We do have some things going on here, but we're kind of getting through it. Hopefully you guys are enjoying this. Just my raw commentary to some of this stuff, also seeing or anticipating how, if this were to actually become law, how this would actually work out in reality as opposed to really nice ideas on a website. But let's see. Next point. Make sure firearm owners take on the responsibility of ensuring their weapons are used safely. So what does that mean? They detail it a little bit. Put America on the path to ensuring that 100% of firearms sold in America are smart guns. Oh boy. I already hate it. Don't like it. Next. We can't just do a next on this one. I actually want to read this. Today, we have the technology to allow only authorized users to fire a gun. Do we, though? Actually, we don't. But I'm just a gunsmith, so I don't know what the hell I'm talking about when it comes to guns and their mechanical capabilities and what the manufacturers are doing or what they're able to do for serial production. But I wouldn't know what the hell I'm talking about. So go on, Joe Biden. For example, existing smart gun technology requires a fingerprint match before use. Biden believes we should work to eventually require that 100% of firearms sold in the U.S. are smart guns. But right now, the NRA and gun manufacturers are bullying firearms dealers who try to sell these guns. When did that happen? Biden will stand up against these bullying tactics and issue a call to action for gun manufacturers, dealers, and other public and private entities to take steps to accelerate our transition to smart guns. Okay, so in previous Q&As and live streams and even almanacs at least once, I remember talking about the fact that we should be a little cautious about people trying to give us advice where, quite frankly, they have no fucking business giving that advice. An example I used on myself was I know nothing about baseball. I've never played baseball. I don't know anything about the game besides just a cursory watching some Dodgers games and things as a kid. I don't know anything about the game. I don't know all the secrets. I don't know the best advice. I don't know how the game is best won or how it's played. I don't know what can increase batting averages. I don't know anything about baseball. So what in the hell kind of place do I have standing there and trying to consult for a baseball team or tell, the Major League Baseball, like, hey, this is what you need to do to win games, or these are the regulations, or these are the changes to the rules we should do in baseball. I have absolutely no business doing anything like that. So I'm just going to go ahead and shut the hell up on that one and just not, I'm just going to stay in my lane. That's not my lane. I don't know anything about that. So we find ourselves again in a situation where we have these really nice, cool guy ideas. Hey, we've at least proven it on a .22 caliber pistol that's ergonomically a disaster. The battery life sucks and it has failures and faults. But if it can be done here as, in a laboratory test and it looks like it's cool, then everybody should do it. The problem is firearms. Let's think about it this way. Beretta, they've been around since 1526 producing firearms of some kind. They're still family owned. They're still based in Italy. They're still doing everything they've always done. And to this day, Beretta still makes guns that operate on springs, steel, aluminum, polymers that are up to the task. But we're talking about guns that are made for extreme use and they need to be dependable. If we look at Glock, which about 65% of American law enforcement carry today, that gun does not have a fingerprint or some cool guy, RFID chip and a bracelet thing that makes the gun work for the law enforcement officer, but only them. If we look at Fabrique Nationale, FN, which has been around since forever in Belgium, with a U.S. division as well, just like Beretta. They've been making guns since forever, just like Colt, just like Smith & Wesson. These are manufacturers been doing this for a while, and they've successfully procured, 6 hours. Well, they've got contracts with the U.S. military, law enforcement, overseas, allied European countries with their militaries and law enforcement. We're dealing with companies who know a thing or two about how to make guns and what is or is not viable. And one thing I seem to notice from the military organizations and the different militaries of the world, law enforcement in our country and around the world, and people who use guns for self-defense, those guns are still steel and springs and polymers up to the task and aluminum frames and things like that, but it's a mechanical object. And I don't see any law enforcement agency in America or otherwise. I don't see any military in America, the U.S. military, Department of Defense, or any military otherwise. I don't see anybody using guns that have smart technology. And the reason why I reference these kinds of organizations or these kinds of professionals is because they exist on the edge. They exist in a dynamic where they are issued or they use a service pistol or rifles or machine guns or whatever it is, and they need, this gun has got to go bang when they need it to. We're talking about life or death. We're talking about winning on the battlefield. We're talking about lives at stake, success. Everything is at stake. For an individual law enforcement officer, for a soldier overseas on the battlefield, whatever it is, the gun has got to work. And what I've noticed, if we take a little cursory search and understanding of who uses what, there's not one law enforcement department anywhere in the United States or abroad. There's not one military or Department of Defense or whatever it is in the United States or abroad there's no one that I know of who utilizes a gun for legitimate, like, this thing needs to work. It needs to be a service pistol or battle rifle. It needs to just do its job. Because lives are on the line and we have got to be successful. And I do not know anyone, any department, any agency, any military, I don't know of anything where they use smart guns. And that's because the guns are going to be carried all day. They're going to be subject to sweat, moisture, rain. They might get dropped and beat up. They're going to be having some sand and some mud. If we're doing occasional cleaning, we have solvents and oils and things that could corrupt circuitry. In the process of shooting these guns, depending on caliber, we're going to have the forces of recoil that whatever chip or electronics or whatever it has on board, it's going to have, it has got to survive that. And all I got to say about this is stay in your lane. Don't have these awesome ideas. Maybe one company can make as a proof of concept to see if it can even happen. They've got a .22 pistol maybe that it still has a lot of flaws, but at least on paper it seems to work. Can we put that into serial production? Can the firearms manufacturers do this by the million every year? I mean, we got 6 Hour with their Cross precision rifle that they just put a recall on. The gun, in terms of how it works, there's no smart technology on it. There's no RFID chips, or it's just a springs and steel kind of operation like guns have always been. And dependable guns always should be. And even then, we still got issues with them and other companies that have problems. When something is not perfectly correct out of the factory, the design needs to be reworked. So if we're going to introduce smart technology into guns that people are going to want to have to defend their families, defend their homes, conceal carry in public, and defend themselves, go hunting, they've got just the once-in-a-lifetime elk just shows up, and now it was really cold and wet this morning and everything is frozen. I can barely feel my fingers. This is a once in a lifetime elk that's going to show up, and my little fingerprint thing is not working, and I'm wearing gloves and it sucks and it froze up and it's not functional. Maybe I'm a law enforcement officer and I have a gun that needs a fingerprint, and maybe my hands are covered in fucking blood or water or sweat or rain. Or mud or something, and I can't get this fucking thing to work, and oh, surprise, I'm dead. So if the people who rely upon guns the most, where the consequences are the most extreme, chiefly law enforcement and military, and they don't even want to use the guns, and I'm looking at the manufacturers who've been doing this for quite some time, and they don't have any offerings that do this. The writing on the wall for me is something like this should probably be dependable and built to a quality standard that has the least amount of problems or hang-ups or potential issues that could get you killed. So it's a nice idea in theory, but it's not a reality, especially if you're asking all of the manufacturers overnight to start building guns with unproven technology that is going to fail the users anyway. Not on board. Next point, hold adults accountable for giving minors access to firearms. Biden supports legislation holding adults criminally and civilly liable for directly or negligently giving a minor access to a firearm, regardless of whether the minor actually gains possession of the firearm. What the hell does that even mean? So, what does that mean? Seriously, again, put this on the list of things I'm going to have to read intensely, because they're going to hold adults criminally and civilly liable for directly or negligently giving a minor access to a firearm. But then the last part of it says, regardless of whether the minor actually gains possession of the firearm. So if you have Grandpa Joe's 1873 trapdoor Springfield that's rusted and broken, and it's not even functional, and we don't want to shoot it because it might blow up, and it's more of a collector's item or a wall hanger, and that thing is hanging on the wall in the living room, and little Johnny lives in the house, and he has technically access to this firearm, even though it physically cannot operate, and it's this rusted old thing hanging on the wall for decoration. Would this put that mother or father at risk of being criminally and civilly liable for directly or negligently giving access to a minor to a firearm? What if a dad wants to buy a .22 rifle for his 8-year-old son for his birthday to help promote firearm safety and training and help teach his son how to be safe with guns, to set him up for success in life whenever he's around guns or encounters guns? And buying that gun and taking him out to the gun range or out in the middle of nowhere and having him safely practice the rules of firearms, responsible ownership and safety and being a parent, closely monitoring the situation and having a really cool father-son moment directly in view and just making sure everything's safe and teaching him the right, safe way, would that put that father in jeopardy for just trying to be a parent? So yeah, these are questions I have, and just got to say, not a fan. But I'm not a fan of all of this, so what else is new here? Next point, require gun owners to safely store their weapons. Biden will pass legislation requiring firearm owners to store weapons safely in their homes. Well, I guess put that on the list too. What does storing their weapons safely in their homes mean? What does that mean? Does it have to be in a gun safe? You can do a gun safe, but it needs to be at least 4 inches thick, and there needs to be 2 combos. You got to give the combo to your local police department, blah, blah, blah. That would be the worst probable, interpretation of this campaign promise here. But what does storing the weapons safely mean? What does that mean precisely? Let's be as exact as we can be when we're defining what that actually means. Now, again, these are campaign promises and problems on their website. This is not, I don't expect this to be an actual piece of policy or an actual bill that has definitions, legal language, and explanations exactly and precisely what they mean. I know that. I'm not expecting that here. I'm just highlighting potential issues and snag ups we're going to have if anything like this were actually to try to be made into a bill. Next step, empower law enforcement to effectively enforce our gun laws. Okay, what does that mean? A couple paragraphs. Prioritize prosecution of straw purchasers. The straw purchasing that you're encouraging from the previous page up. Straw purchasers buy a firearm on behalf of an individual who cannot pass a background check. Biden will end those loopholes. They're not loopholes. That's actually very black and white. Okay, that's like a straw purchase is defined in federal statute, which is law. And those who perpetrate that, there is no wiggle room even on sentencing. The judge opens up the federal handbook because we are a common law-based country. They say, hey, this is what you did. It's proven that you did it. This is the sentence. Have a nice day. Bam. That's it. What loopholes are we talking? It's not a loophole, dude. This is literally the law right now. But going back, Biden will end those loopholes by enacting a law to make all straw purchases a serious federal crime and ensure the U.S. Justice Department has sufficient resources to prioritize their prosecution. Straw purchasing, for those who don't know, is already a very serious federal crime. That is one of those things for anyone who's worked in a gun shop or is considering working in a gun shop and selling guns as a job. That is one of those things. There's certain mistakes you can make that fall on the business, that put the FFL or the license itself at risk, the business owner at risk. There's certain things that create legal liability that if you make a mistake. And then there are certain things that you as the individual can do that will put you personally in jail. One of them is facilitating a straw purchase. And if you're buying the gun for someone who is a prohibited purchaser, and if caught, you face personal legal consequences like prison time for that. For knowingly and actively engaging in a straw purchase. And if you're even the gun shop salesman, you as the individual, if you detect a straw purchase and you still make things happen, you face federal prison time. This is already a very serious federal crime. This is the kind of stuff that even one hint of straw purchasing will shut down an FFL so fast. It'll put the individual salesman in jail. It's gonna put the buyer in jail, and by the way, it's gonna put the prohibited purchaser in jail. Everyone is going down. So I don't know what this means. Again, I'd want to read through to see exactly what is going to change, if anything. It definitely sounds cool if you're in favor of gun control, but is it changing anything that's already on the books? I don't think so. That is probably the most serious thing that could ever happen at a gun shop in terms of the law, with the paperwork and how purchasing goes down. I don't know what gets more serious than that. Besides like an armed robbery in the gun shop or something crazy like that. Okay, moving on. Notify law enforcement when a potential firearms purchaser fails a background check. Too often, when prohibited persons attempting to buy a firearm fail a background check, state and local law enforcement is never informed of the attempt. What the fuck kind of planet are they living on? That's what? I'll keep going. As president, Biden will direct the FBI to set up a process to ensure timely notification of denials to state and local law enforcement, and he'll support legislation to codify this process. This empowers law enforcement to follow up and ensure prohibited persons do not attempt to acquire firearms through other means. Okay, that last one is fluff. Unless a law enforcement officer is like personally, sent on a detail to babysit a person who failed a background check, and unless they're hanging out with that person 24/7, there's no way that you're going to stop that person from acquiring a firearm through other means or building their own or going to Home Depot or whatever they got to do. If they want to do some stuff, they're going to do some stuff. And unless you have a law enforcement officer, a two-man team around the clock just watching this dude every step he takes all the time, that's all rainbows and sunshine. At least that last sentence there. So the thing is, at least in my state, and many states are like this, again, effective states, if someone fails, they get denied and they fail a background check, they are getting a visit from police like tonight, like it's happening today. Chances are they might have, I've had some people come back and try to complain that they got denied, and before they even got home, the cops were just at their house, just chilling, waiting for them. So I'm not going to say that every single state is that effective. I'm just saying that I don't know what planet we're living on that the state, again, the state agency runs the background checks. The gun shop has nothing to do with this. The gun shop is just going to online, or if it's out of state for a long gun, they're going to physically get on the phone and call. But the gun shop is going to run the background check. And then if someone gets denied, that's on the state to immediately dispatch that to local law enforcement, and that's already happening. So if you have, like we talked about, a really ineffective and complacent and incompetent state like California, maybe this provision is needed for California to get its shit together, or other states that are suffering from that kind of issue. But I don't know what planet you're living on where someone gets denied for a firearms purchase and then someone just kind of like, oh, whatever. Like, no, that goes to local law enforcement, usually the county sheriffs, unless they live in a city or a town. And then the local police are called for that city or town. I'm not sure what this would change, if anything, besides produce more bureaucracy and not really make things happen. Next step. Require firearms owners to report if their weapon is lost or stolen. Responsible gun owners have a responsibility to inform law enforcement if their weapon is lost or stolen. Biden will enact legislation to make this the law of the land. So, I don't know about you guys, but I'm not a millionaire. Every gun that I buy, that's going to cost me some money. Maybe it's a $400 or $500 pistol, maybe a Glock or a 320, something like that. If that ever got outside of my maintenance or control or custody, I was dumb enough, and I've said this in multiple videos, and I'll say it again, I do not leave guns in cars overnight. I don't do it, especially with COVID. Some people kind of getting desperate, breaking in the cars, trying to find valuables and things. It's not something I do. But if I was going to do that and a gun got stolen out of my truck or something like that, I'm immediately contacting the police and saying, hey, it's a stolen gun. Here's the serial number. And if I don't know the serial number, well, in my case, I know every serial number of every gun I've ever bought ever. And if I sold it or consigned it or whatever the case, I have who it went to, all that info. I run my own bound book. I don't have a CNR license. I'm not an FFL, but just as a responsible gun owner, I have my own bound book of every gun I ever bought, who I bought it from, what gun shop it came from, when I did it, all that stuff. So I have all the serial numbers of anything. So if anything got stolen, I have pictures, descriptions, who I bought it from or what gun shop I got it from, when I got it, what it looks like, the serial number, the caliber, you name it, I have it. Now, if you don't, and you're dumb enough to be leaving guns in your car overnight, it gets broken into, that gun gets stolen, or you're on vacation or something, the house gets broken into and your guns are gone. At least you have, you can track down those serial numbers through contacting every gun shop you went to and be like, hey, I bought this gun. It was about like April of 2015 or whatever. It's now stolen. I just want to get the serial number just so I can give that to law enforcement. They can put it in the federal, stolen gun database. So if it ever shows up anywhere, at least like it's a known quantity that it's stolen. So I don't know who would just like, you wake up in the morning, you go outside and you got some coffee, getting ready to do your commute, get to work or whatever it is. And then you realize your truck is broken into, the gun is gone, or the guns are gone. If you were dumb enough to leave guns overnight in a car, or you come back from vacation, your house is broken into, you notice all your guns are gone. Who on this planet is going to do that and be like, oh, I guess I'll just, buy some new windows and yeah, that sucks. No, first thing you're doing is you're calling police like, hey, someone broke into my car or my house. Second thing you're doing is like, hey, my car or my house had guns in it. If you're like me, where you have every serial number, pictures of it, you have descriptions, everything, that's going to be too easy. But even if you don't, be like, hey, I had like 2 Glocks, 1 AR-15, and a hunting shotgun. This is what they were. This is what they looked like. I can reach out to, the different gun shops I bought from over the years or whatever. But bottom line, I have stolen guns that are out there. And we can get the serial numbers. There's ways to do that. But, like who's going to come back from vacation or wake up in the morning and see broken windows in their car, realize guns and other valuables are gone, and just decide not to report that to the police or make a complaint. Police are going to show up. The first thing they're going to ask, what was stolen? What was stolen? Is anything missing? What looks weird? Did you have any guns that got stolen? Is anything missing? I don't know who is having guns lost or stolen and they just wake up and they're like, whatever. That's something that's always been weird to me. I don't understand why that's even a thing or like an issue that people even talk about. Okay, next thing, stop ghost guns. Oh, here we go. Kevin DeLeon, you haunt us still. One way people who cannot legally obtain a gun may gain access to a weapon is by assembling more grammar issues on their website, on their own, either by buying a kit of disassembled gun parts or 3D printing a working firearm. Biden will stop the proliferation of these so-called ghost guns. No, you won't. By passing legislation requiring that purchasers of gun kits or 3D printing code pass a federal background check. Additionally, Biden will ensure that the authority for firearms exports stays with the State Department and, if needed, reverse a proposed rule by President Trump. This will ensure the State Department continues to block the code used to 3D print firearms from being made available on the internet. So that would be a shame for anyone doing 80%ers, just trying to buy, you buy a standard strip lower at your local gun shop and you order a Palmetto State Freedom Rifle build kit or something like that. It would be a shame for people who are 3D printing and making their own guns, which is totally lawful to make that. Here's the bottom line, okay? I'm not the technology whiz kid. I'm not the technology dude. All I have to say is once you post something on the internet, it's there forever. There's no way you can ever make it fully disappear. It's never. So if you have, thousands of gun designs and, 3D printing files are being uploaded to the internet on many different platforms every single day, how are you going to get rid of that? How are you going to stamp it out? How are you going to, once it's on the internet, you can't undo that. especially if people are saving them on hard drives. One website, gets crashed or taken down, another one pops up. People are passing files to each other. There's no way you're ever going to stamp it out. That's at least what I know about the internet. The next thing about 3D printers is, there was a time when, a telephone in the house was, very few houses had it. There was a time when printing with paper and ink, like having a printer in your home, that was just something that major corporations or tech companies had, but the average American household didn't have that either. There was a time when a huge screen TV or a VCR or a VHS player, any of this stuff, it was not common. It was expensive. Very few American households had this technology. And on average now, every household has a phone, or definitely, mobile phones, cell phones. Pretty much a lot or most houses have a printer. And if they don't have one, it's because they don't need one or don't want one. But for $60, you can get a printer. It's every house is going to have, in this case, we superseded the VCR. We got DVD players, PlayStation, video game consoles that will do it. So at the end of the day, I look at 3D printers in the same light. Right now, they're kind of expensive. Right now, polymer and the media or materials they use on 3D printers to make guns, not as strong, or it's kind of primitive at this point. But 20, 30, 40 years from now, I think every American household is going to have a 3D printer. And who knows what else. I mean, it's only just a natural evolution of technological advancement. And when you put stuff online, it's always there. It's just going to be there. So if most or all households are going to have 3D printers someday, which I believe that to be the case, maybe not tomorrow, but maybe it's not going to take 100 years. And if we put stuff online expecting to somehow make it disappear, that's both of those things are unrealistic. And even if the internet is totally banned, which I don't see that being, at least in this country, anytime soon, or if 3D printers totally stopped everything and 3D printers are going nowhere, I don't see any of those things happening. But even if that was the case, you always got, I don't know, the over 300 million firearms, magazines, ammunition, everything we have currently right now in circulation. And even if magically you could wave a wand and all the guns and mags and ammo, everything goes away, you still got the hardware section at Home Depot or Lowe's. That's never going away. So it's dude, if someone is going to build their own firearms, which is their right, but also it's federally legal to do that, you're not going to stop it by trying to play whack-a-mole on the internet, trying to get stuff off of, being online, or trying to stamp down on how many people can have access to a 3D printer. Dude, it's not going to happen. So sounds good. It's going to be a colossal, pain for everyone else who believes in technology and just the evolution of times, but it's not effectually going to do anything. And of course, they had to use ghost guns. Of course, we can thank Kevin Ghost Gun DeLeon from California for that. So awesome. Reform, fund, and empower the U.S. Justice Department to enforce our gun laws. Biden will direct his Attorney General to deliver to him within his first 100 days a set of recommendations for restructuring the ATF and related Justice Department agencies to most effectively enforce our gun laws. Biden will then work to secure sufficient funds for the Justice Department to effectively enforce our existing gun laws, increase the frequency of inspections of firearms dealers, and repeal riders that get in the way of that work. That's just, a whole bunch of fluff, and again, we're talking about supplying sufficient funds, or we're going to enhance the funding for this or that. We're talking about spending all this money. I've not heard any discussion where it's coming from, but I already know how. More taxes. Awesome. Next thing, direct the ATF to issue an annual report on firearms trafficking. This report will provide officials with critical information to better identify strategies for curbing firearms trafficking. That is fucking rich. How about we stop? Let me back up. So this point is talking about, oh my God, we're going to direct the ATF to give us a report on firearms trafficking and how to stop it. How about we start with doing the whole Obama era situation where we're just giving guns to cartel members and purposely letting them just go out there into Mexico with these guns they illegally acquired through federal government facilitation. The whole, Fast and Furious, does that ring a bell? So if we want to stop firearms trafficking, what if we started there? Let's stop letting the federal government pressure local gun shops into giving guns to known cartel members who are definitely taking those guns down to the south side of the border and killing Border Patrol agents with it and other innocent Mexican nationals and people down there. What if we start with that? I know that's kind of thinking outside the box. Maybe it's a little bit too crazy for some people, but what if the whole Fast and Furious thing, which happened under the joint Obama-Biden administration, leading to the death of Border Patrol agents and unknown, God knows how many Mexicans died from those guns. They purposely gave them to cartel members, pressured local gun shops to sell them to them, and then let them go across the border as some part of master plan. How about we start there, and then maybe you can come back and actually talk to me about stopping gun trafficking from the guy who was right-hand man in the administration when you guys were doing that shit. So how about you shut the fuck up on that one? Great. Next point. Let's see. It says tackle urban gun violence with targeted evidence-based community interventions. Oh boy. That's going to be a whole bunch of sap. Not going to read through it, although I do see underlined Biden will create a $900 million 8-year initiative to fund these and other types of evidence-based interventions in 40 cities across the country. I'm going to leave that on the back burner. If I can't even make it past the headline title, and I already know it's a bunch of bullshit, especially in this case, some very costly bullshit, we're just going to have to move on, guys. Keep this going. And again, you guys can check this out. Look at it for yourselves. Next point. Dedicate the brightest scientific minds to solving the gun violence public health epidemic. In 2013, President Obama issued a memorandum clarifying that a long-standing appropriations rider that prohibited the CDC and other federal scientific agencies from using federal dollars to advocate or promote gun control does not prohibit those agencies from researching the causes and prevention of gun violence. The National Institutes of Health subsequently embarked on funding some of this research, though evil Republican leadership in Congress refused to appropriate any funds to the CDC for this work. Biden will call for Congress to appropriate $50 million to accelerate this research at the CDC and the NIH. Again, that's pretty rich, being in the middle of a global pandemic. And, you know what I think is cool? If there's a global pandemic, a government agency called the Centers for Disease Control, so the CDC, the National Institutes for Health, that organization as well, these sound like organizations that probably are a little busy right now, and if they're going to get money, they should probably worry about, the global fucking pandemic. So again, we're talking about money we don't have that we're going to just throw at them from somewhere, raised taxes, and we're going to divert them from working on COVID-19 and finding vaccines and testing them and making things get right again. And instead, let's just throw a bunch of money at them we don't have to worry about a Bill of Rights kind of thing, guns. But no, I'm sure that's a really good idea, especially because COVID-19 is it's such a priority and it's such a big deal for them that we're going to tell the CDC to do this as well and don't worry about COVID as much. Something doesn't seem to really make sense there, but then again, I'm not a doctor, so I don't know. But if you're the Center for Disease Control, you probably need to worry about controlling the current disease, which is a global pandemic at this point. So I don't, government being government, I don't know. Next point, prohibit the use of federal funds to arm or train educators to discharge firearms. Okay, I'm going to read this. We should be passing rational gun laws, not requiring educators who already have too much on their plates to also protect the safety of their students. Biden supports barring states from using federal dollars to arm or train educators to discharge firearms. I'm just going to tell you, jumping straight to the boots on the ground, rubber meets the road analysis of that. That just means schools that are less safe. In my state, educators are 100% legal to, if they choose to, carry on school campus. And we're not talking about, I think oftentimes in this argument, they're like, oh, well, you know, that's like, I don't want teachers to get hired at a school district and they get issued a gun and then here's your curriculum and here's your gun. And like, that's not what we're talking about, dude. We're talking about teachers who, surprise, have a life outside of just being a teacher. And in that life, they've chosen to get a concealed carry permit. They happen to carry or shoot guns and have guns. And they'd like to carry a concealed firearm while they're working on their person. They already have the permit. They already have the guns. They're continuing to train. They just want to be able to do it when they get to their place of work for the benefit of the children in the school. Should anything horrible start to happen, that they at least have a way to protect their classroom, protect their kids, or do something about it. And if Biden wants to stop that or help cut that down, at least states using federal funds to help facilitate the process of making schools safer, I'm really baffled at like how much dissonance you need to really think this is something that's good, or actually even like a step above, because I'm really trying to look at this like how separate from reality and what really goes down would you need to be to actually think this is going to make schools safer, or like the 10th Amendment, does that matter? Just dictating the states, you can't use this or that or do this, like, and the end result, even worse, is our children are less safe. Educators who want to defend their kids, defend themselves should anything happen, that you're just telling them, no, we don't want you doing that. Yeah, that's something that angers me. The rest of them have been kind of concerning. I've had definitely a bunch of points. That one, just not wanting our kids to be safe in school, that's a tough one to try to find a way to be okay with. And I don't know how people are okay with that. But maybe they just don't know what that actually would translate to when the rubber meets the road, when it's actually going down. At least the good news is on that one, the states can use their own money to train educators. At least in my state, we offer a pretty big discount for educators when we're doing our concealed carry courses, that they can sign up and get a discount if they're an educator. Some places are doing it for free. We got local sheriffs will actually teach concealed carry to educators for free, because a cop who has like 3 kids in school wants to be able to worry about his day and do his job as a cop and know that at least his teachers have, the teachers of his children have a gun, that they can be safe in school. So that one just blows my mind. Address the epidemic, there's that word again, of suicides by firearms. Biden believes any plan to address the gun violence epidemic must address suicides by firearms, which account for 6 in 10 gun-related deaths. For the first time, I've actually seen them say that, because usually they're like, "Oh my God, look at 40,000 gun deaths a year. This is crazy. It's like Iraq on every American street corner." They don't really talk about the fact that over half of that is suicides, unfortunately. And at least finally, for once, we're seeing that. 6 in 10 gun-related deaths, but are often left out of the conversation. Yes, by you. Many of the policies noted above, including safe storage requirements and extreme risk protection orders, will have a serious impact, no they won't, on efforts to reduce gun violence. No it won't. But there's so much more we need to do to support people experiencing suicidal ideation. So that's thoughts of suicide. In the months ahead, Biden will put forward a comprehensive plan to improve access to mental health services. Well, I guess I'm kind of stunned with that one because usually they like to present just the overall, like the FBI has a published annual report on how many crimes or deaths or homicides or things happened and in what manner did it happen. The annual crime report will detail this. And looking at their data, compiling everything from across the country for a whole year, always tends to be that suicides are over half of the overall gun deaths that we see every year in this country. Every single one of them is something I don't want to see. But this specifically is conveniently always left out. And actually they go ahead and mention the thing that they always leave out. And then they turn around and say, oh, but it's often left out of the conversation. Yes, by you. The people wanting gun control, they don't want people to know that stuff is self-inflicted, as opposed to they want to paint this picture that all of these gun deaths are this crazy gun battles happening every day on the streets. So I guess I'm kind of surprised they mentioned it, and that is or appears to be accurate, but then they turn around and say, oh, but it's often left out of the conversation. Yes, by you guys. That one, I guess, I'd have to see the details and really figure out what that would be, the comprehensive plan to improve access to mental health services, especially in the time of COVID. Financial troubles, people being locked inside all day, depending what state they live in, all that other stuff going on, mental health care or mental health in general for a lot of people right now is not good. So I would be very interested to see what the actual statute or the bill, the language of the bill would actually say. Or maybe this is just fluff. I'm not sure yet. We'd have to see the bill. Let's see. We are pretty much at the finish line here. Let's see. As President, Biden will make federal programs more trauma-informed. What in the hell does that mean? During his first 100 days, Biden will direct his cabinet to conduct a review of all federal programs that directly serve communities likely to experience violence and identify reforms to make sure those programs effectively address resulting trauma. I'm just going to stop it there. A lot of the communities that do experience lots of shootings, lots of deaths, lots of gang violence, those are the places where, you increase the capabilities and personnel of police department and you build that real community outreach. That's when you start seeing those things go away. But no, we're going to defund the police, was it? Or eliminate the police, or maybe just defund them, or transition money away from law enforcement in those kinds of areas. And we'll go ahead and see the shootings rise, and they're just going to claim it's the guns, and it's not the fact that we cut the legs out from under the cops. And we put all that money in social workers who were crazy enough to sign up for the job to deal with a homeless dude with a knife on the side of the road. Who's going to sign up to do that job? And at what point do the police need to be there? The ones that you defunded? I'm not sure. So it just seems like creating problems just to be able to offer solutions or alleged solutions for the problem and not even fix it at all. Pretty par for the course. Is just, I always find that gross, especially when it's this obvious. Most Americans, especially the supporters who want this, they really don't understand that, and that sometimes even that's the worst part of that. But at least just trying to look at this and seeing what happens on our streets, and I don't see that helping anything. Let's see. Train healthcare and other service providers in trauma-centered care. Like trauma, are we talking like emotional trauma, or are we talking like ER level trauma, like traumatic injury stuff, like What are we talking? Let's see. To prevent re-victimization and secondary trauma, Biden will align training efforts throughout relevant federal programs to include a focus on understanding the traumatic events of violence, providing appropriate care to avoid furthering the trauma, linking survivors with evidence-based trauma therapies, and reducing myths about domestic and sexual violence. This will be accomplished through agency directives, policy guidance, and special conditions for grantees and contractors. Are they Ukrainian? Getting back to the serious point, that you could pretty much claim to have achieved that by simply requiring all doctors once a year to do an electronic internet training, 30 minutes on the computer, click all these boxes, watch the PowerPoints, and then it says you're good for the next year. Great job. So I guess we'd have to see, what does that actually mean? It's just online training, once or twice a year, check the boxes, skip through the PowerPoints if it lets you, and just, okay, you're certified, good. Or is this actually trying to do something besides spend money we don't have to increase a bureaucracy we don't want to enlarge? I'm not sure. So for those of you who are actually looking at the website, surprise, and I'm surprised, but we actually made it to the end. And there were a couple parts I skipped there, or I mentioned it, just didn't go into serious detail about. Mostly that was just emotional sap, trying to invoke responses, not make you really think about data or science or things like that, and really just think about how sad it is for whatever they're trying to sell. Some of it was sappy and emotional. Some of it was like, well, that's just going to be fluff. That's just, it sounds great, but really they're not going to do shit, and they're going to say mission accomplished and it's going to be fine, but it's really not. Some of this was genuinely concerning, though, especially the red flag conversation, or that bullet point, and especially, at least from a legal sense, trying to enter all AR-15s, AKs, and whatever else they're going to claim as an assault weapon into the NFA registry, which ordinarily would require a tax stamp and submitting a form and registering that thing with the federal government. And then only after you get the tax stamp can you build it or acquire it, whatever it is. So we're talking about a very regulated and very controlled and also very expensive process, especially if you own quite a number of ARs or AKs, or maybe it's going to be a Mini 14 or M1 carbine or whatever they claim is an assault weapon. I'm not sure. There's no parameters here. And again, like I said, I don't expect statute. I don't expect very detailed explanations here. This is the Biden-Harris campaign website just trying to sell it and trying to make people feel good that, like, hey, we're going to do some great stuff. So I do expect a lot of this is kind of fluff. It sounds good for the supporters who want this, but it's really not going to mean anything. The last thing I'll add on this, just keeping it in perspective. Again, this is a campaign website. They had a couple grammar errors, but really I can let that go for the moment. Just focus on the fact this was clearly written during the campaign. It has not been revised since Joe Biden has become the president-elect or has won the election. So we're still in that transitional period where we're waiting for Inauguration Day when he's like in the hot seat trying to get stuff done. He's got a lot of other things between COVID-19 and you name it. It's going on obviously right now in December of 2020. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of really extreme things on here that we talked about. But keep in mind, I don't want to say take it with a grain of salt, but just understand a campaign website is just going to talk about the things they intend to do, but actually getting all of that crap done that we just talked about is going to rely on Article 1 of the Constitution in terms of Congress. So the House is going to have to pass it. The Senate is going to have to pass it, and they're going to have to pass the same version of the bill because there's going to be changes. Then they got to go back and forth and repass it. So it has to mess around in Congress between the House and the Senate, but assuming it gets through the House and the Senate and the same version of the bill has been approved, now it's going up to the executive. Joe Biden will sign it. And if for some reason Joe Biden resigns or for whatever reason Kamala Harris becomes the president, she's going to sign it too. So really we have to worry about it getting through Congress first. And assuming it can make it through the House and the Senate, it will get signed if it makes it to Biden or Harris. But now we got to worry about, that little snag up for them, the Constitution, specifically Article 3, the judicial branch, where there's going to be a massive amount of litigation and lawsuits that are immediately going to hit the second this thing gets passed, like not even within a week. And then that thing eventually it's not going to be fun because it's going to be the law of the land, at least for probably a year, maybe a year and a half, till it makes it to the Supreme Court. And then we're going to be in a situation where I do not think pretty much, I don't want to say all of this, but the vast majority of this, I do not think this is going to pass the Supreme Court, especially the current composition of the Supreme Court. And again, that's assuming it even makes it through Congress. Right now, it's December 8th at the time that I'm recording this, 2020, and we're still waiting on that Georgia runoff where there's 2 senator seats. One of them looks like it's going to be good to increase the numbers because right now the Republican Party in the Senate, Republicans have 50 confirmed members in Congress. The Democrats have 47, and there's 2 independents. So really, 46. So really, at this point, we're sitting on just wondering what's going to happen in Georgia. Georgia is one of those states that if there's a margin of error that's close enough, or due to their state law, when the numbers look like this on the initial November election, then they do a runoff. So in this case, January 5th is when Georgia is gonna do their runoff. So before President Biden or President-elect gets inaugurated, becomes President Biden, before that even happens, we're going to know what the final look of the U.S. Senate is going to look like in terms of Republicans versus Democrats. So if Republicans can snag at least one more seat, 51 out of 100 seats, that's going to be a majority. Like we opened this Almanack with Feinstein talking about she needed those 51 votes and she didn't get it. She wasn't kidding. You need 51 votes. That is a majority to get something passed. And if we have an assault weapons ban or any of this garbage makes it into a bill and it goes through the House and then moves into the Senate, if the Republicans control 51 out of 100 seats, pretty much guaranteed at that point, any of this garbage is not going to make it. You're going to have some Democrats. You got the Joe Manchins of the world, a Democrat from West Virginia, but there is no way in hell that guy can go back to West Virginia and expect to retain his job. If he was to vote yes for assault weapons ban in the Senate, he also voted yes for Kavanaugh, Justice Kavanaugh. So you're going to have some, whether it's New Mexico, West Virginia, there's going to be some Democratic senators already that are guaranteed a seat. They're already in, but they're not. It's not in the best interest of them staying in their position if they want to vote in favor of this. But at least based on the Georgia runoff, if that goes successfully for the Republican Party, they're going to have at least 51, which would be a majority in the Senate, which means this garbage, assuming it even makes it through the House to begin with, it's definitely not going to make it through the Senate. Which also, in addition to that, anything that's going to involve packing the courts, which you do not need a constitutional amendment for that, you just need a bill to become law. So again, that's something that would need to go through the House and eventually the Senate before it can go to the executive. So if it's assault weapon ban stuff or any of this stuff, or it's packing the courts, if we got 51 out of 100, we got a majority that's pretty ironclad at that point. None of this stuff is going to go down. I'm not saying it's all pressure off. Let's not worry about it. If the Georgia runoff appears favorable, we have at least 51 out of 100 senators that are not going to vote for this. I'm not saying like totally just relax. I'm just saying this is why I've said in my previous videos or live streams, I'm not as concerned about it as maybe some others are because, again, everybody, read your Constitution. But at the end of the day, that was the Biden-Harris gun control plan, or at least campaign promises on their campaign website. I'm going to have that linked down in the description, and you guys can check it out for yourselves. Some of you guys may have been listening and reading as I was talking about it, but I do appreciate you guys being here for this almanac. I figured this was probably the proper time to really go into the weeds on these proposals. Again, these are just campaign promises. Whether or not they can actually be achieved, that's going to require Congress. And right now, if you want this stuff to pass, it's looking pretty shaky. But at least these are things we should care about, we should be informed about, we should know about. So I thank you guys for being here, and we'll see you again for the next Almanac. Well, you guys are still here. At least for those of you who stood through the dead space for just a second. A little bit of a bonus extra on the end of it. First of all, I don't think this is going to pass. I don't. But even if it did, let's say all of that passed. All of it, even the crazy stuff to the fluff and the basic stuff, let's say it all passed. I have no intention of complying at all. I'm not complying with any of this. And I've said it in previous videos, and I'll say it again. I'm always going to own guns. Always going to own AR-15s. I'm a free American. I think I've earned that right. Going overseas, putting boot to ass for this country and our Constitution to keep this going. I've filled out paperwork for all the guns I've bought, background checks for all the guns I've bought. I'm a law-abiding citizen. But if this were to come to pass, I'm not going to comply. There's no way in hell. I'm just not going to do it. As an American, that's my choice. If I'm facing down the barrel of a prospect of not having choices or choices being dictated or individual American civil liberties not being an option anymore, I'll just make my own option. I'm an American. That's what we do. And no, I'm not going to comply. No. Bill of Rights and the Constitution, a little bit too much more important to me. So, some of you guys may have already suspected that or heard from previous almanacs and videos. I'm always going to be interested in freedom. I'm always going to be living a free life. And that's just what I'm going to do. So, that's the real end.